Before dawn, Paris breathed in a cold October silence, the kind that presses against the skin like an omen. The city still slept, unaware that history was shifting beneath its cobblestones. A thin mist clung to the narrow alleys, swallowing the glow of scattered lanterns. And through that fog came the first echo, the metallic clatter of armored boots striking stone in perfect, merciless rhythm. King Philip's men marched without hesitation, their torches carving bright wounds of light into the darkness. They moved like a single organism, trained, silent, relentless. Orders had been whispered hours earlier behind locked palace doors, sealed with fear and greed. What was about to unfold had been planned with the precision of a ritual sacrifice. No whispers, no warnings, no mercy. Inside the Templar commandery, the night had been peaceful. Some brothers prayed, some slept, some tended to the quiet routines that defined their lives. They had survived the wrath of kings, the heat of crusades, and the long deserts of the Holy Land. They had held their faith against armies and empires. None suspected that the final blow would come not from the sword of an enemy, but from the betrayal of the very land they defended for nearly 2 centuries. The first knock wasn't a knock at all. It was a battering ram crashing into the gate, splintering oak, scattering sparks. The brothers jolted awake. In the hallways, oil lamps flickered as men rushed toward the noise, their white mantles swirling like ghosts in the half-light. Confusion spread fast. Shouts filled the courtyard. "To arms! Who are they? What treachery is this?" But the truth came crashing in with the soldiers themselves. Helmets low, shields up, swords drawn. "By order of the King of France," a commander roared. "In the name of the crown, you are under arrest." The words froze the air. Arrest? For what crime? The Templars had fought for Christendom, bled for the kingdom of heaven, protected pilgrims with their lives. Their loyalty had never wavered, not to the Pope, not to the Church, not to the divine mission they believed in. Yet here were royal soldiers swarming every hallway and chamber like locusts, chaining men who had once charged fearlessly into battlefields. Old knights, young novices, commanders who had led armies, all seized like common criminals. The sound of shackles locking around wrists echoed through the commandery like a cruel litany. Torches illuminated frightened eyes and faces streaked with disbelief. Some knights resisted, but they were outnumbered and unprepared. Their swords rusted in their scabbards, untouched since peace had settled on France. Their armor sat neatly stored, unworn. They were monks now as much as warriors, dedicated to prayer and charity. And that made the betrayal cut even deeper. Outside, carts waited with iron cages. The prisoners were shoved into them one by one. Horses stamped impatiently, steam rising from their nostrils. The king's men acted with urgency, as though every second risked disaster. It was clear. This operation had to be swift, absolute, and silent. They feared what might happen if the Templars had time to gather, to question, to resist. Throughout Paris, the same scene unfolded again and again. At dawn, bells chimed softly, unaware of the storm beneath them. Hundreds of Templars were seized in a single coordinated strike, the kind of precision only possible with intimate knowledge of their routines. Knowledge only a friend or a traitor could possess. As the sun crept over the rooftops, its light painted a gruesome picture. White mantles stained with dirt, chains glinting in the morning, and the fear of men who had faced death 1,000 times but had never feared injustice this cold, this calculated. Rumors spread quickly through the city. Some residents crossed themselves in fear. Others whispered that the Templars must have committed some unspeakable sin. Only the soldiers knew the truth. The charges had been decided long before any evidence existed. Heresy, idolatry, corruption. Accusations designed not to reveal truth, but to justify destruction. At the heart of it all stood King Philip IV, a man drowning in debt, desperate for gold, desperate for power. The Templars were the only force strong enough to stand between him and the absolute monarchy he craved. Their wealth, their independence, their loyalty to the Pope, it all made them enemies. Not because they were guilty, but because they were inconvenient. As the carts rolled through the streets, a few knights lifted their heads toward the cathedral spires rising beyond the fog. Some whispered prayers. Some clenched their jaws. But all shared the same question burning silently in their hearts. Why? Why strike now, in peacetime? Why betray those who had defended Christian lands for generations? Why accuse men of impossible crimes, worshipping demons, spitting on the cross, practicing dark rituals? These weren't the accusations of truth-seekers. They were the tools of fear. The people watched in uneasy silence. Children clung to their mothers. Merchants held their breath. No one dared intervene. The king's soldiers marched with such confidence, such righteous fury, that many assumed the worst. Perhaps the knights had fallen into darkness. Or perhaps the crown had revealed a horror hidden behind their walls. But something felt wrong. The Templars marched with heads high, even in chains. Their eyes weren't those of guilty men. They were the eyes of men betrayed. By mid-morning, the commanderies across France were emptied. Temples stripped. Chests seized. Documents confiscated or burned. Entire archives vanished in flames, carrying with them histories, letters, secrets. Anything that might speak in the Templars' defense. The smoke rising from those fires was the smoke of erasure. By noon, the once mighty Order of the Temple had been reduced to prisoners awaiting judgment for crimes they hadn't yet been told. The city buzzed with confusion, fear, excitement. Some felt justice had been served. Others felt an ancient pillar of Christendom had just been toppled. But beneath all the noise, beneath all the fear, a deeper question whispered through the corridors of power. What secret did the Templars hold that frightened a king into unleashing such ruthless precision? What truth lay hidden in their vaults, in their chronicles, in their forbidden archives? Truth so dangerous that it needed to be destroyed before sunrise. Something more than wealth had been stolen that night. Something older, something darker, something the world was never meant to see. Before the smoke of the morning's chaos had even begun to fade, something far more deliberate and far more ominous unfolded in silence. While the Templar knights were being dragged through the streets in chains, another force moved just as swiftly through their commanderies. Teams of royal clerks, scribes, and agents sent not to seize men, but to seize memory itself. These were not soldiers hungry for plunder. These were specialists, men trained to sift through parchment, to judge the value of ink, to recognize danger not in swords, but in words. They arrived with sealed orders instructing them to confiscate or destroy anything resembling a record. Letters, ledgers, scrolls, secret communications, coded manuscripts, even mundane inventories. Anything, in short, that might reveal what the Templars knew, what they believed, or what they had hidden. The atmosphere inside the commanderies shifted from violent intrusion to organized obliteration. Piles of documents were stacked quickly, some carried into wagons, others fed to fire pits already glowing with embers. It was not just an arrest, it was an erasure. The brothers, watching helplessly, saw years of their work consumed in moments. Correspondence from the Holy Land, treaties with kings, instructions from previous Grand Masters, and spiritual teachings passed down through generations. All vanished in crackling flames. What troubled them most was not the destruction of their property, but the intent behind it. A king seeking justice preserves evidence. A king seeking silence burns it. The smoke that rose above the rooftops was thick and black, carrying with it the scent of scorched parchment and a chilling sense of finality. Yet not every document met the flames. A few Templars, anticipating danger in the tense weeks before the arrests, had quietly smuggled out select writings. Some were trusted to sympathetic priests, others hidden beneath loose stones or buried in small chests beyond Paris. Whispered warnings had reached them, rumors of fabricated charges, secret councils, whispers of betrayal. The brothers did what they could, knowing that truth, once lost, could not be rebuilt. But they never imagined the scale of what was coming, nor the coordination required to annihilate an entire order's memory in a single morning. Among the smuggled pieces were fragments of letters, coded messages, and copies of chronicles not meant for public eyes. These documents, which later resurfaced in obscure monasteries and distant archives, hinted at two unsettling realities. First, that the Templars had been aware of an approaching storm, and second, that they had guarded knowledge which some believed too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. One abbot in Burgundy described the rescued parchments as ink that trembles, claiming their contents could ignite kingdoms or shatter faith. Whether he was exaggerating or speaking a deeper truth remains uncertain. As the royal clerks worked tirelessly, scribes began drafting lists, cold, methodical inventories of what had been removed or burned. These lists, ironically, became some of the only surviving records of what once existed. They mentioned items such as sealed folios of Eastern correspondence, papal drafts in cipher, unknown script from Jerusalem excavations, and maps of the inner sanctum. Each vague description sparked more questions than answers. What were these unknown scripts? What did the excavations beneath the Temple Mount truly uncover? Why did the crown prioritize these items above gold, weapons, or property? Outside Paris, similar scenes played out across France. In Troyes, clerks worked through the night burning chests of scrolls. In La Rochelle, a major Templar port, royal agents seized large crates marked only with cryptic symbols. Witnesses later claimed those crates were rushed onto Philip's private vessels and taken out to sea, their contents never seen again. In Champagne, a chronicler wrote that the king's men searched with the fever of those seeking not treasure, but truth. That line, buried in a minor monastic account, suggested the crown believed the Templars possessed something more valuable than gold. Meanwhile, word of the destruction spread quickly among scholars, monks, and nobles. Many were appalled. The Knights Templar had been archivists of the Crusades, custodians of sacred relics, and guardians of testimonies from battles and pilgrimages. Their letters formed a vast network of communication stretching from Scotland to Syria. To obliterate their writings was to blindfold history itself. It was a crime not against the order, but against memory, against civilization, against time. In Paris, the fires burned well past midday. Monks from nearby abbeys watched uneasily as smoke marked the sky in thick columns. Some whispered that the king was burning evidence of his own sins. Others murmured that something hidden within those pages had to be contained, buried forever. The truth may lie between those extremes or far beyond both. By dusk, only ashes remained. The commanderies were stripped bare, their archives hollowed out. The soldiers had left with prisoners, but the clerks had left with something far more potent: the power to shape the narrative that would define the Templars for centuries. Without their writings, the order's voice fell silent, leaving only accusations to fill the void. But fragments survived. Hidden in cellars, tucked behind altar stones, carried across borders by fleeing brothers. Small pieces of a much larger story. These scattered remnants became the whispers beneath the ashes. Hints of forgotten missions, forbidden discoveries, and a secret the Templars protected even in their last desperate hours. A secret that kings feared, the church questioned, and time tried to swallow. And in those fragments lay the first clues to understanding why that night, the night the Templars were betrayed, had to be executed with such precision, such speed, and such terror. Someone wanted the order gone, yes, but more than that, someone wanted their story rewritten. Someone wanted the world to forget what the Templars found, what they kept, and what they swore to guard even as the flames rose around their lives. The ashes settled, but the questions never did. In the beginning, before the legends, before the accusations, before the rise and catastrophic fall, the Knights Templar were not an army, not a financial empire, not a feared political force. They were simply 9 men, 9 exhausted, weather-worn knights who arrived in Jerusalem around the year 1119, carrying little more than their swords, their faith, and a purpose they could barely articulate. They were not backed by kings or popes, nor did they possess the immense wealth later associated with the order. In truth, they were poor, painfully, visibly poor. Their clothes were patched, their horses were thin, and their resources were almost non-existent. And yet, in their poverty lay the seed of something that would one day challenge monarchs, shape nations, and terrify the powerful. Their leader, Hugues de Payens, was a knight seasoned by years of war and pilgrimage. He carried the memory of countless fallen comrades, men who had journeyed to the Holy Land seeking salvation only to find bandits and brigands waiting along the roads. The newly conquered Jerusalem was still unstable. Pilgrims continued to die by the dozens on their way to the holy sites. The roads were steeped in danger, and the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem lacked the manpower to secure them. It was in this chaos that Hughes and his small band found their calling. They approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a simple but radical proposal. They would dedicate themselves to protecting pilgrims on the dangerous routes between the coast and the holy city. They asked for nothing in return, no payment, no land, no titles. They would live as warrior monks, bound by vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. The king, recognizing their sincerity, and perhaps sensing a quiet hope, accepted. With no proper barracks to offer, he gave them the stables beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Crusaders believed sat atop the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. That location would define their identity for the next 2 centuries. The early Templars lived frugally. Their armor was dented, their meals sparse, their beds hard. Chroniclers described them as austere and silent, devoted fully to prayer when not riding out to patrol the roads. Their daily lives followed a strict rhythm. Sunrise prayers, patrols through dusty wilderness, defending travelers from raiders, tending to wounded pilgrims, and returning to their makeshift quarters to pray again. Their humility impressed the clergy, who saw in them a new kind of knighthood, one that bound martial valor with monastic purity. Yet, for all their visible simplicity, there was something quietly mysterious about them. Even in these early years, rumors circulated among both Christians and Muslims about the strange activities of these 9 men living atop one of the most sacred sites in monotheistic history. The stories claimed they were not merely patrolling roads or guarding pilgrims, but exploring ancient tunnels beneath the Temple Mount, moving at night with torches, disappearing for hours at a time. Whether these tales were truth or invention is a question historians still debate. But the timing is undeniably intriguing. The Templars' transformation from obscure monks into a powerful order began soon after these early years under the Temple. Their reputation grew slowly but steadily. Pilgrims reported feeling safe on routes once considered fatal. Knights Hospitaller and local lords began acknowledging their bravery. Word of their existence reached Europe, where monastic reformers saw in the Templars a shining example of Christian discipline. But approval alone did not build the order. It was a sermon delivered years later that changed everything. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the Templars were officially recognized as a military order of the Church. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, the most influential churchman of his time, wrote a glowing endorsement proclaiming them fearless knights of Christ, men who fought not for glory or riches, but for God. His words electrified Europe. Suddenly, nobles sought to join them, peasants donated land, and monarchs pledged support. The order went from 9 poor knights to an ideal, an embodiment of Christian hope in a violent world. This meteoric rise, however, casts their humble beginnings into even sharper contrast. The Templars had no intention of becoming symbols, rulers, or legends. They began as a brotherhood forged by suffering and faith, shaped by the dusty roads of a fragile kingdom. They were men who prayed for strength not to conquer, but to endure. Nothing in their early days suggested they would one day build fortresses across continents, influence kings, or be accused of heresy and destroyed by fire. But the seeds were planted quietly, subtly, in the shadow of the ruined temple. In their poverty and devotion, they attracted attention. In their mysterious early years, they sparked curiosity. And in their willingness to die for pilgrims, they won admiration. These early virtues would become both their greatest strength and their eventual curse. From the dusty stables beneath the ancient stones of Jerusalem, the Templars stepped onto a path they could never leave, one that would lift them from obscurity to unmatched power, and eventually drag them back into darkness. And as their influence grew, so did the legends. People began to ask, why these 9 men? Why this place? Why did their rise begin the moment they settled at the Temple of Solomon? The answers lay hidden in layers of faith, ambition, and ancient memory. waiting to reshape the world in ways no one could yet imagine. The Holy Land in the 12th century was not a place conquered and secured. It was a boiling cauldron of shifting alliances, desperate faith, and relentless violence. The Crusader states, carved out by European knights only a few decades earlier, stood like fragile islands of unfamiliar rule in a sea of ancient cultures, seasoned warriors, and rising empires. The kingdom of Jerusalem itself was less a kingdom and more a precarious foothold, held only by men who believed God favored the bold. Every road could be an ambush. Every valley could hide an army. Every night could bring a raid that wiped out an entire settlement before dawn. This was the world the early Knights Templar stepped into, a crucible that would forge their legend in fire, blood, and unwavering devotion. For the new order, Jerusalem was both a sanctuary and a battlefield. Their headquarters atop the Temple Mount gave them a commanding view of the city, but the safety inside those walls ended the moment they rode out through its gates. Patrols often stretched for days, and the dangers they faced were not limited to enemy soldiers. Bandits, deserters, tribes angered by the Crusaders' occupation, and small, nimble raiding parties moved constantly through the rugged landscape. Some attacked out of desperation, others out of vengeance, and still others for profit. Whatever their motives, they shared a common objective: kill the Christians who dared claim Jerusalem. The Templars quickly earned a reputation for fearlessness. They did not patrol cautiously or retreat when ambushed. Their rule forbade them from fleeing unless outnumbered at least 3-1, and sometimes even that guideline was ignored. Chroniclers wrote of Templar brothers charging headlong into ambushes, forming tight clusters around pilgrims, holding off waves of attackers until reinforcements arrived or until every knight had fallen. Their white mantles, embroidered with a red cross, became symbols of both hope and dread depending on who saw them. To Christian pilgrims, they signified salvation. To their enemies, they signaled a storm of steel that refused to break. Battles in the Holy Land were not grand affairs with banners and trumpets. They were quick, savage eruptions in narrow ravines, desert passes, and unforgiving hillsides. The heat was merciless, the terrain deceptive, and the stakes absolute. A single mistake meant slaughter. Yet the Templars adapted with disciplined ferocity. They mastered desert warfare techniques, studied enemy tactics, and trained relentlessly. Their horses were bred for endurance, their weapons maintained with monk-like precision, and their strategies refined through constant experience. In time, they became so effective that Muslim chroniclers, though enemies, described them with respect, admiring their courage even as they fought to destroy them. Life in the Crusader states also taught the Templars the harsh truth that alliances were fluid. Crusader lords frequently quarreled, often more interested in their personal holdings than in unified defense. Political rivalries divided armies at the worst possible moments. The Templars, however, operated outside feudal obligations. They answered only to their Grand Master and to God, which made them more reliable than many noble-led forces. When a city was under threat, the Templars did not debate, they rode. When a lord hesitated, they acted. Their consistency earned them respect, but also resentment from those who envied their independence and their unwavering moral discipline. Their growing participation in major battles cemented their reputation. In countless engagements, Templar knights held the line when others fled. They fought at the Battle of Ascalon, where their stubborn resistance helped secure a crucial victory. They defended fortified outposts deep in hostile territory, sometimes holding on for weeks without water or reinforcements. Their bravery bordered on self-sacrifice, and many wondered whether they feared death at all. Perhaps they didn't. Their monastic vows taught them that dying in defense of the Holy Land was not a tragedy but a victory, an immediate passage into eternal reward. But the Templars also witnessed the darker consequences of war. They saw Crusader arrogance lead to catastrophic defeats. They saw entire villages burned, not only by their enemies but sometimes by their own allies. They saw the toll constant conflict took on the innocent, families torn apart, crops destroyed, bodies left unburied in the sun. These experiences hardened them, not only as warriors but as an order. They developed strict discipline, rigid hierarchy, and a code of conduct that attempted to bring order to a chaotic world. While other knights feasted, boasted, and competed for glory, the Templars ate in silence, prayed at fixed hours, and rode into battle with absolute unity. This contrast made them appear almost inhumanly focused, machines of faith powered by belief and duty. Yet something deeper began to change within the order during these formative years. The Holy Land was a place where cultures collided, where ancient knowledge converged, and where spiritual beliefs intertwined in unexpected ways. The Templars encountered scholars, mystics, and texts older than Christianity itself. They rode through lands that had seen prophets, pharaohs, and empires. They fought enemies who quoted scripture as confidently as they did. And through it all, they began to understand that the Holy Land's significance was far more complex than the Crusaders had imagined. Some Templars returned from campaigns with strange stories of hidden ruins in the desert, of sacred relics guarded by rival orders, of inscriptions carved in languages no one could decipher. Others claimed to have spoken with scholars who possessed knowledge forbidden in Europe. Whether these accounts were exaggerated or not, they planted seeds of fascination within the order. The Templars had come as protectors, but the Holy Land began transforming them into seekers, men who glimpsed mysteries buried beneath centuries of conflict and faith. This transformation was subtle at first. Outsiders still saw them as warriors of God, riding with unmatched ferocity. But inside the order, questions stirred. What truly lay beneath the Temple of Solomon? What knowledge had been lost in the ancient wars? What secrets were worth so much bloodshed? The Crusader world was a furnace, reshaping not only their skills but their destiny. The Templars entered as humble protectors of pilgrims, but the Holy Land forged them into something far greater and far more enigmatic. The Crucible did not merely test them. It awakened something within them, something the world was not yet ready to understand. The early decades of the Templar Order were defined by a single mission: protecting the countless pilgrims who risked everything to walk the roads of the Holy Land. These pilgrims came from across Europe, humble farmers who had saved for years, nobles seeking absolution, merchants hoping to pray before the Holy Sepulchre. They believed the journey would cleanse their sins. But for many, the journey never ended in prayer. It ended in blood. The routes were treacherous. Narrow mountain passes, dry riverbeds, and stretches of open desert created perfect ambush points. Raiders knew the patterns of Christian travelers, often attacking at dawn when pilgrims were weary, disoriented, and vulnerable. Bandits would strike swiftly, killing or capturing entire groups before riding off into the wilderness. Stories of these ambushes spread like wildfire across Europe. Families slaughtered, priests stripped and left to die under the sun, bodies found with crosses carved into their chests. Fear did not stop the pilgrims, but it shadowed every step they took. This was the environment the Templars stepped into, an environment where courage alone was not enough. They needed discipline, strategy, and unity. So they organized patrols that covered the most dangerous areas, mapping the terrain with the precision of seasoned scouts. They learned which valleys hid raiders, which caravan routes needed escorts, where water sources could become traps. Their presence became both a shield and a warning. A handful of Templars was often enough to deter bandits who would otherwise massacre dozens. Yet protection was only half of what defined their mission. The other half was mystery. Their headquarters at the Temple of Solomon, granted to them by Baldwin II, was more than a convenient location. It was a place steeped in legends older than Christianity itself. Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike believed that the ancient temple had once housed relics of unparalleled spiritual significance. The Ark of the Covenant, sacred scrolls, artifacts from the age of David and Solomon, echoes of divine communication. For centuries, conquerors had searched for these relics, believing them to hold immense power. Now, 9 obscure knights occupied that space, living directly atop the ruins of one of history's most sacred structures. It didn't take long for whispers to begin. At first, the rumors were subtle, claims that the Templars asked strange questions about old tunnels, that they studied ancient maps, that they conducted late-night vigils in parts of the temple inaccessible to ordinary visitors. Local residents occasionally saw torchlight flickering beneath the structure, deep underground, in passages that had been sealed for generations. Workers claimed they heard metal scraping against stone in the early hours of the morning. A few even swore the Templars had discovered hidden chambers lined with ancient inscriptions. The knights said nothing. Their silence only fed the stories. Pilgrims who visited Jerusalem would speak in hushed tones of the secretive monks who guard more than the roads. The Templars' humility and discipline made them appear trustworthy, but their secrecy made them intriguing. Kings in Europe began to ask questions. Clergy grew curious. What were the knights looking for beneath the ruins? Why were they so invested in studying the deep foundations of their headquarters? The answer, if there was one, remained locked behind the order's vows. Meanwhile, above ground, their public duties continued with unbroken devotion. The Templars built way stations along the perilous routes, small fortified shelters known as domus, where pilgrims could rest safely. They often shared their own food, patched travelers' wounds, carried the weak to safety, and offered burials for those who did not survive. In return for this protection, pilgrims donated what they could: food, clothing, a few coins. These small offerings accumulated over time, allowing the order to expand slowly, establishing a network that connected Jerusalem to the coast. The more the Templars served the people, the more trust they earned. And with trust came influence. Lords in Europe began granting them land. Merchants entrusted them with valuables. Nobles recommended their sons to the order. Their reputation as warriors of faith grew steadily, but so did their reputation as guardians of hidden knowledge. The church took note, but not all church leaders understood how to interpret the Templars' unusual circumstances. Some believed they were uncovering relics that would strengthen Christendom. Others feared they were meddling in matters too ancient, too dangerous, too sacred. Yet the Templars continued their silent work beneath the Temple Mount, never explaining what they sought or what they found. Their devotion, however, was unmistakable. Every discovery, if indeed there were any, was handled with the discipline of men trained to protect secrets even unto death. It wasn't long before chroniclers began to suspect that the Templars' sudden rise in prestige, influence, and resources was connected to something deeper than donations or bravery. Something discovered, perhaps. Something preserved. Still, on the surface, their mission remained pure. They defended pilgrims with unwavering courage. They died shielding strangers they had never met. They rode against raiders without hesitation. And they did it all without asking for payment, credit, or glory. Pilgrims who survived the journey often said the same thing upon reaching Jerusalem. The Templars are more than knights. They are protectors of the sacred. But others whispered something entirely different. They are searching for what the world forgot. And they have found something. Whether these whispers were born from imagination or truth, they cast the Templars in a new light. A light that would follow them for generations. Their work above the ground earned admiration. Their work beneath it earned suspicion. And somewhere between the dust of pilgrims' footsteps and the ancient stones of the temple, the Knights Templar stepped into a role neither they nor the world fully understood. Their journey had begun with devotion, but what lay ahead would draw them into mysteries that would shape their destiny, ignite legends, and one day justify the accusations that tried to destroy them. The rumors of the Templars' underground activities did not fade with time. They grew, twisting themselves into the fabric of Holy Land gossip, Crusader chronicles, and fearful whispers carried by merchants across the Mediterranean. To the Templars themselves, this attention mattered little. They did not seek approval or understanding. They operated under vows of obedience and secrecy, and in those early decades, secrecy was becoming as central to their identity as their white mantles and red crosses. What happened beneath the Temple of Solomon was spoken of only in private chambers, in guarded conversations, and sometimes not at all. But the land had eyes, and soon, stories began to spread of a discovery that changed everything. The Temple Mount was no ordinary foundation. Layer upon layer of civilizations had built upon it: Canaanite, Israelite, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Islamic, and finally Crusader. By the time the Templars set foot on its worn stones, its subterranean spaces were a labyrinth of collapsed chambers, forgotten tunnels, and sealed vaults. The Crusaders themselves believed the mount to be the original site of Solomon's temple, a place where sacred relics had once been housed, where priests had guarded divine objects, where ancient kings had invoked the presence of God. Legends whispered that the Ark of the Covenant had rested there, radiating holy fire. Others spoke of secret rooms known only to the high priests, where forbidden texts were hidden to protect them from conquest. 9 knights living above such a place was not coincidence. It was opportunity. Over time, small clues surfaced hinting that the Templars concealed more beneath the temple than anyone realized. One account described workers seeing knights hauling debris through side passages at night. Another recorded the faint sound of chiseling from deep underground, too rhythmic to be natural, too deliberate to be ignored. A Muslim historian wrote that the Franks entered the depths of the holy house and moved like worms through the earth. That description, mocking though it was, captured something essential. The Templars were moving with purpose. No one knows exactly when the breakthroughs occurred. Some chroniclers suggest it happened within the first decade. Others claim it took years of slow excavation, careful clearing, and deciphering broken structures. But whatever the truth, the Templars eventually unearthed chambers no one had entered in centuries. These were not simple storage rooms or empty passages. They bore markings, symbols carved into the stone, ancient inscriptions, and niches that once held objects long since removed or stolen. Some walls bore script so old and eroded that even the most learned scholars of Jerusalem could not identify its origins. For the knights who discovered these spaces, the experience must have been overwhelming. They were men of faith, raised on scripture, taught to believe that the temple was the holiest site of their ancestors' faith. To find hidden chambers beneath it was more than archaeology, it was revelation. But it was what they found next that shifted the course of their history. Accounts, fragmented and concealed, suggest the Templars uncovered more than architectural remnants. There are traces of references to sealed containers, stone chests, or relic boxes discovered intact. Some describe scroll fragments, wrapped in cloth and protected with meticulous care, bearing writing in unfamiliar characters. Others speak of metallic objects, small enough to carry, yet crafted with unusual skill. A few proposed that they found relics associated with early Israelite rituals, implements described only in the Book of Kings or the writings of Josephus. There is even mention in obscure letters of a casket of illumination, a phrase so strange it defies proper interpretation. None of these descriptions are confirmed, yet the consistency of the whispers, crossing languages, cultures, and decades, suggests something extraordinary surfaced beneath the temple. What is certain is that shortly after these supposed discoveries, the Templars' fortunes changed dramatically. Donations increased. Their political influence grew. Their recruitment surged. Princes who had previously ignored them suddenly became patrons. Land grants poured in. Their authority swelled at a speed that defied explanation. It is possible, of course, that this rise was due solely to their proven bravery in protecting pilgrims. But the timing raises unsettling questions. Some historians argue that what the Templars found provided them with knowledge that gave them leverage in diplomatic negotiations, or insight into secret histories known only to the clergy, or information that shifted the balance of power between Jerusalem and Rome. Others propose the relics themselves had spiritual significance so profound that the Church recognized and rewarded their discovery discreetly. There is even a theory that the Templars found something that challenged accepted doctrine, something so ancient, so controversial, that revealing it would fracture Christendom. Whatever the treasure was, it wasn't wealth. The Templars would eventually become rich, but the discoveries beneath the temple did not fill their coffers with gold. They filled their minds with possibilities, their hearts with conviction, and their order with a sense of destiny. As the years passed, stories of their excavation became exaggerated. Some claimed the Templars found the Holy Grail itself, an object revered not just for its physical presence but for the spiritual truth it represented. Others insisted they discovered genealogical records linking ancient bloodlines, documents that could challenge the authority of kings. A few even suggested they uncovered abandoned rituals, secret teachings, or mystical knowledge preserved from the time of Solomon. a branch of wisdom known only to prophets and priests. The Templars themselves remained silent, not out of pride but out of duty. Whatever they had found, if indeed they found anything at all, was considered sacred or dangerous or both. And then the most curious detail began appearing in chronicles written decades later. The Order's sudden, heightened obsession with secrecy and discipline. Their rules became stricter, their ranks more guarded, their rituals less transparent. Their loyalty to the Order itself began to overshadow all else. Something had changed. Something had awakened within the Templars during their time beneath the temple. Whether it was knowledge, relics, or revelation, it reshaped the Order's future, turning them from simple protectors of pilgrims into custodians of a deeper truth. A truth they vowed to protect even if it meant carrying it across continents, hiding it from kings, or burying it so deeply that even history could not unearth it. And as the Templars emerged from the shadows of their excavations, their rise across Europe accelerated, and so did the legends surrounding the treasure of the deep vault. When the Knights Templar first arrived in Jerusalem, they had no intention of becoming rulers, bankers, diplomats, or power brokers. They came as humble warriors, poor in possessions but rich in conviction. Yet the Holy Land had a way of transforming those who lived within its storms, and as the decades passed, something remarkable happened. The Order evolved. Slowly at first, then with unstoppable momentum, they grew into an institution so vast, so interconnected, and so influential that many began to consider them a kingdom without borders. A nation not defined by land, but by loyalty, faith, and a network of power stretching farther than any king could ever dream. It began with necessity. As the Templars expanded their patrols, built way stations, and defended outposts, they required supplies: horses, armor, food, medicine, weaponry, clothing, tools. To maintain even a small force in the Holy Land was expensive. To maintain hundreds of knights and thousands of sergeants and support staff was staggering. The Order did what any disciplined military institution would do. They organized. But the Templars did not simply build a supply chain, they mastered it. They built farms, vineyards, mills, blacksmith workshops, and storage depots. They learned how to coordinate caravans across deserts and fleets across seas. What began as logistical necessity soon became a formidable administrative machine. Europe took notice. Landowners who admired the Templars' devotion began donating estates. Sometimes out of piety, sometimes out of guilt, sometimes out of the desire to partner with holy warriors who could pray for their souls. A great many nobles, having no heirs, willed their entire properties to the Order. Monasteries that struggled financially allowed Templars to manage their lands in exchange for protection and stability. Villagers even offered their labor, eager to work under an institution known for fairness and discipline. Slowly, almost silently, the Templar network spread. What started as a handful of farms became hundreds. What began with a few outposts in France grew into a vast territorial web across Spain, Portugal, England, Scotland, Hungary, Cyprus, and beyond. The Templars were not bound by national borders. They belonged only to the Pope and to their Grand Master. This independence, rare, dangerous, and powerful, allowed them to operate without interference from local kings. Their estates, called commanderies, functioned like miniature fortresses and administrative capitals. Each one supported the Order's mission by producing goods, providing training, and serving as waypoints for knights traveling to the Holy Land. Over time, these estates became hubs of commerce and stability. Merchants trusted Templar properties. Peasants felt safe near them. Kings used them as neutral grounds for diplomacy. And yet, despite their growing territorial presence, the Templars owned no kingdom. They held no crown. They swore loyalty to no throne. Their allegiance transcended borders, forming an identity that was both deeply spiritual and profoundly political. They were monks, but monks who commanded armies. They were soldiers, but soldiers who obeyed a monastic rule. They were servants of God, but custodians of secrets, wealth, and influence. It was only a matter of time before this strange hybrid nature created something entirely new. A multinational organization in an age long before such things existed. Their influence was not only material, it was psychological. European society in the 12th and 13th centuries was marked by instability. Wars, famine, and political upheaval were constant threats. In such chaos, the Templars became symbols of stability. Their white mantles suggested purity. Their discipline inspired trust. Their vow of poverty, though later misunderstood, reassured people that their power was not driven by greed. Villagers who feared the whims of feudal lords often sought the Templars' protection. Merchants transporting goods through dangerous regions requested Templar escorts. Even monarchs looked to the order for support in times of crisis. The Templars were everywhere, and their reputation grew with every generation. Their political neutrality turned them into mediators. When nobles quarreled over land, Templar commanders stepped in to negotiate peace. When kings feuded with the church, Templar envoys carried messages between crowns and popes. They were trusted because they owed nothing to political factions and because their word, once given, was unbreakable. Their incorruptibility made them indispensable. Their incorruptibility also made them feared. As their estates flourished, so too did their financial responsibilities. Donations grew into coffers. Coffers grew into vaults. Vaults grew into systems of wealth management that surpassed anything Europe had ever seen. The Templars offered secure storage for valuables, managed estates for nobles, transferred funds across kingdoms, and developed early forms of credit that revolutionized travel and trade. What began as simple donations evolved into an early form of international banking, an innovation that gave the order unprecedented economic power. And yet, through all this, their brotherhood remained strangely united. A knight stationed in England was spiritually connected to another stationed in Jerusalem. A sergeant working a vineyard in Spain labored for the same purpose as a knight defending a castle in Syria. The order became a nation of its own, a nation built not on land, but on faith, discipline, and a shared sense of sacred purpose. But as they expanded, so too did suspicion. Kings began to wonder how much influence the Templars truly wielded. Clergy questioned whether the order's independence gave them too much freedom. Rival groups envied their privileges and accused them of arrogance. The Templars' growing network, once viewed as a blessing, gradually became a cause for concern among Europe's rulers. What if the Templars chose to support a rival king? What if they withheld funds from a kingdom in need? What if their loyalty to the Pope clashed with the interests of a monarch? Their neutrality, once admired, now seemed threatening. The Templars were aware of these tensions. They were not naive, but they also believed they were fulfilling God's plan. Their networks, their lands, their resources, every element of their expansion was, in their minds, a tool to support the defense of the Holy Land. They did not thirst for political domination. They sought efficiency, unity, and strength. But in a world ruled by insecure monarchs and ambitious nobles, strength itself was a threat. By the mid-13th century, the Knights Templar had become something Europe had never seen before. A vast, multi-continental organization with influence in economics, warfare, diplomacy, agriculture, architecture, and even scholarship. They built castles that rivaled royal fortresses. They developed technologies in construction and logistics that surpassed those of many kingdoms. Their naval fleet, though modest, was disciplined and strategically essential. Their commanderies formed a communication network so efficient that messages could travel from England to Jerusalem faster than royal correspondence within a single kingdom. The Templars had become a power unto themselves, without ever intending to be one. They had begun as protectors of pilgrims. Now they were guardians of Europe's stability and custodians of a legacy they barely understood. Their rise was breathtaking, their structure unmatched, their unity unshakable. But in the eyes of jealous kings and fearful rivals, the Templars were no longer humble monks. They were a nation, a wealthy, influential, fiercely independent nation that did not recognize any earthly ruler. And nations, especially powerful ones, could not exist without attracting enemies. The Templars' rise across Europe had happened so swiftly, so efficiently, and with such quiet precision that many kings barely realized what had occurred until it was too late. Their commanderies had transformed into hubs of economic stability. Their farms produced abundant harvests, Their vineyards supplied thriving markets, and their workshops forged superior weapons and tools. Every resource was catalogued, every shipment recorded, every exchange noted with monastic discipline. And at the center of this meticulous system lay something more powerful than land or armies: information. The Templars understood early on that knowledge was the true currency of the medieval world. They traveled more widely than any other group in Christendom, moving across borders, seas, and kingdoms with a freedom even royal envoys envied. Every knight, every commander, every messenger brought back reports. Who was fighting whom, which lords were in debt, which kings were preparing for war, which regions were struggling with famine, which nobles were quietly gathering influence. They saw everything, and they remembered everything. Over time, this sprawling flow of information crystallized into the Order's greatest innovation: the hidden ledger. Unlike royal treasuries, poorly organized, easily manipulated, and vulnerable to corruption, the Templars developed a system of record-keeping that was astonishing for its era. Their scribes were trained to maintain detailed logs of every transaction, every estate, every tithe, every donation, every debt, every promise. These records were not scattered chaotically across Europe but carefully centralized in key locations, updated constantly, and guarded with unwavering secrecy. Kings tracked taxes, merchants tracked sales. The Templars tracked everything. Word spread quickly that Templar vaults were more reliable than any castle strongroom. Nobles who feared robbery entrusted their wealth to the Order. Widows who feared greedy relatives left their inheritances in Templar safekeeping. Crusaders heading to the Holy Land deposited their estates with the Templars, who managed them in their absence. But the most significant clients of all were kings, powerful men forced to rely on the Order because no one else offered such security. This reliance gave the Templars access to Europe's most sensitive financial weaknesses. They knew which monarchs were drowning in debt. They knew which kingdoms depended on foreign grain. They knew which nobles risked rebellion behind polite smiles. They knew who was trustworthy and who was desperate. And desperation, in the medieval world, was as dangerous as any weapon. But the Templars did not hoard this knowledge for personal gain. Their vows bound them to the Order's mission. They used their information to support their brothers in the Holy Land, to coordinate supplies, to arrange troop movements, and to prevent miscommunication. The Holy Land could not survive without constant reinforcement, and the Templars crafted a financial network capable of fueling that effort across continents. One of their most revolutionary creations was a system of letters of credit, effectively early checks. A pilgrim could deposit money with the Templars in Paris, travel across hostile lands, and withdraw funds from them in Jerusalem. The Order recorded the transaction, verified the pilgrim's identity using coded symbols, and ensured that every coin withdrawn in the Holy Land matched what had been deposited in Europe. No merchant, no king, no religious order had ever created such a system. It was brilliance disguised as charity. Yet with brilliance came fear. Kings began to whisper that the Templars were becoming too powerful. How could a mere religious order manage wealth with the precision of a royal treasury? How could they transfer fortunes across continents? How did they avoid fraud? How did their ledgers remain so accurate, even across thousands of miles? The secrecy of their accounting methods only intensified suspicion. Behind the stone walls of commanderies, teams of scribes worked day and night, updating ledgers that were never shown to outsiders. These scrolls and books were bound in leather, marked with symbols known only to the Order, and written in languages chosen deliberately to be obscure: Latin, Old French, cryptic shorthand, and sometimes ciphers known only to senior officers. Some records were encrypted entirely, requiring keys held by only a handful of Grand Masters. Rumors began to swirl. Some claimed the Order's ledgers held the blackmail-worthy secrets of Europe's aristocracy. Others insisted the Templars had created a secret economic map of the continent, tracking harvest cycles, trade routes, military readiness, and political alliances. A few whispered that the Order's power did not come from gold or relics, but from something far more dangerous: the ability to predict political upheavals before they happened. To kings, this was terrifying. The Templars were the only group capable of acting independently of any throne. Their reach stretched from Portugal to the Holy Land, from Scotland to Cyprus. Their messengers rode faster than royal couriers. Their ships sailed under a sovereign flag recognized by no earthly ruler. Their order was disciplined, loyal, incorruptible, and wealthy. And worst of all, they owed nothing to kings. Their loyalty was to their rule, their grand master, and to the divine mission they believed God had entrusted to them. As their network grew more sophisticated, their role in European politics became unavoidable. They stored royal treasures. They held important documents. They witnessed treaties. They negotiated ransoms. They moved armies. They funded crusades. They rescued kingdoms from bankruptcy. To the common people, the Templars were saviors. To the Church, they were essential. To kings like Philip IV of France, they were a threat. A frightening, disciplined, well-informed, financially independent threat. The hidden ledger was the heartbeat of the order, pumping wealth, information, and influence through its veins. But it also became the shadow that followed them everywhere. Whispers of power too large for monks, secrets too deep for a religious order, and knowledge too dangerous for the fragile egos of medieval monarchs. And in time, it would become one of the reasons the world turned against them. For kings did not fear what the Templars possessed. They feared what the Templars knew. From the outside, the Knights Templar appeared as paragons of discipline, warrior monks wrapped in white mantles, living lives that seemed pure, structured, and unwaveringly devoted to God. But those who observed carefully, who listened to passing whispers or paid attention during rare Templar ceremonies, sensed something different beneath the surface. A quiet gravity surrounded the order, a tension between what they showed the world and what they kept hidden, a mystery shaped not by sin or scandal, but by the intricate rituals, rules, and unspoken traditions that defined their inner life. At the core of their secrecy was the Templar Rule, a colossal document inspired by Cistercian monastic regulations but adapted to the needs of warrior monks. It dictated everything. How many times they prayed, what they ate, how they dressed, when they could speak, how they conducted themselves in battle, how they treated their brothers, and even how they handled their possessions, of which they technically owned none. The rule prescribed simplicity, obedience, and humility. Yet within its countless clauses were hidden layers. Special rites reserved only for full knights, coded prayers, silent rituals, and strict penalties for revealing internal practices. Outsiders saw discipline. Insiders saw a world governed by a nearly impenetrable structure. This structure became fertile ground for rumor. The Templars were forbidden to speak during meals. They ate in silence as scripture was read aloud. They slept in their armor, boots at the ready, prepared to ride at any hour. Their ceremonies of induction were private, shielded from outsiders. Even the Pope, who approved and protected the order, did not fully grasp every detail of their internal customs. Most of their rule was public, but not all. Over time, parts of it evolved into traditions transmitted verbally, known only to senior officers and rarely written down. These silent sections of the rules within rules, gave birth to enduring legends. One of the most whispered mysteries was the Templar Oath. New recruits underwent a ceremony that mixed monastic vows with martial pledges. They swore loyalty not just to God and poverty, but to the order above all earthly authorities. The initiation was conducted in closed rooms illuminated only by candles, with a select group of knights present. A novice kneeling before the master would speak words that he would never repeat again, words that bound him spiritually and emotionally to the order with a force few could describe. Those who participated spoke of a solemn atmosphere, of a sense that they had joined not merely a brotherhood but a lineage stretching far beyond the living. This secrecy created space for misunderstanding. In an age when rituals were often interpreted through fear, jealousy, or imagination, anything unknown became suspicious. Tales spread that the Templars performed strange rites, that they required new members to renounce worldly symbols, that they embraced harsh trials to test loyalty. Most of these stories were distortions of ordinary monastic traditions, but distortions gain power when wrapped in silence. Their strict hierarchy added to the mystery. At the top stood the Grand Master, a figure whose authority exceeded that of generals and bishops. Beneath him were commanders, sergeants, and knights, each bound by duty and ritual. Orders moved downward, information moved upward, and discipline held the structure together. To outsiders, this hierarchy seemed cold, impenetrable, almost mechanical. To the Templars, it was sacred. Every brother knew his role. Every command was obeyed without question. Such unity was rare in medieval Europe, where feudal loyalties were fragile. The Templars' cohesion appeared supernatural to some, unnatural to others. Their battle code was equally enigmatic. Templar knights were forbidden to retreat unless the odds reached impossible levels. They rode into battle in tight formations, reciting prayers as they advanced. They were known to charge enemy lines with almost suicidal resolve, believing that death in battle was a direct path to God's grace. Enemies often mistook this discipline for fanaticism, whispering that the Templars fought with the fury of men possessed. But the truth was simpler. Their rituals before battle, their spiritual preparation, their absolute obedience to their commanders created a clarity of purpose that other armies lacked. Still, some stories were harder to dismiss. Travelers spoke of Templar knights ending with cryptic meetings, where only the most senior knights gathered behind thick stone walls. Some believed they studied esoteric writings recovered from the East. Others said they guarded relics or discussed matters known only to the order. These tales, whether exaggerated or not, contributed to an aura that made the Templars seem both holy and otherworldly. Their vows, once symbols of devotion, became in the eyes of suspicious minds evidence of hidden intentions. And then came the rumors of symbols. Templar churches, commanderies, and chapels often featured carvings and markings that differed from ordinary Christian iconography. Some showed geometric designs. Others depicted strange creatures or unfamiliar patterns. To the Templars, these symbols were artistic choices, architectural necessities, or simply variations picked up from craftsmen across Europe and the Holy Land. But in an age deeply sensitive to signs and omens, such symbols took on darker meanings. Whispers began to swirl that the order possessed secret knowledge of sacred geometry, that they used coded markings to identify hidden chambers, that their churches aligned with celestial patterns. None of these claims were proven, but their persistence revealed how profoundly the world struggled to understand the order's inner life. Jealous men saw conspiracy, the fearful saw danger, the curious saw sacred knowledge, and the ambitious saw opportunity. But beneath all the accusations and stories, one truth lingered. The Templars did not hide secrets because they were guilty. They hid secrets because they believed their mission demanded it. Their vows, their rituals, their hierarchy, these were the mechanisms that protected their unity. Without secrecy, the order would have fractured. Without discipline, their mission would have failed. Yet secrecy, by its very nature, invites suspicion. And in the end, suspicion became a weapon as sharp as any sword. For when kings like Philip IV sought reasons to destroy the order, they did not need to invent new accusations. They simply amplified the rumors that had followed the Templars for decades. Their silence became interpreted as guilt. Their rituals became proof of heresy. Their symbols became evidence of idolatry. Their rule, once the foundation of their strength, became the fuel for their destruction. The Templars had built their world upon secrecy. They did not realize until too late that secrecy would also light the fire that consumed them. Across Europe, admiration for the Knights Templar grew, but so did unease. Behind their immaculate discipline and spiritual devotion, a shadow began to form. It wasn't anything the Templars did openly. It was what their presence implied. Their rise had been too quick, their independence too absolute, and their loyalty to no earthly king too radical for a world built on hierarchy, pride, and control. As the order expanded its networks, acquired land, built fortresses, protected trade routes, and managed vast sums of wealth, a subtle shift began. Respect turned into envy, dependence turned into suspicion, and admiration quietly curdled into hostility. The first signs of animosity emerged in whispers, hushed conversations among nobles, passing remarks from clergy, lingering glances from monarchs who saw, in the Templars' white mantles, a challenge to their authority. The warriors of Christ had become something more, an organization so wealthy, so organized, and so unshakably united that they operated like a sovereign power. They owed no taxes. They answered only to the Pope. Their lands were exempt from local jurisdiction. They traveled freely through borders that confounded even royalty. And because of this, kings began to realize an uncomfortable truth. They could not control the Templars. In medieval Europe, control was everything. If lords could not control their vassals, rebellions erupted. If monarchs could not control their nobles, kingdoms fractured. If the church could not control religious orders, authority crumbled. And here was the Order of the Temple, an elite group of warrior monks who obeyed neither crown nor county. They could ride through a king's territory without paying tolls or kneeling in fealty. Their commanderies were like miniature states hidden within kingdoms. Their fortresses, often thicker and taller than royal castles, symbolized a defiance that was never spoken but always felt. Local rulers bristled at the idea that within their lands stood fortified strongholds they did not own. The Templars' autonomy made them invaluable allies, but unsettling neighbors. A king's enemies might seek refuge in Templar property. A noble outrunning debt or law could hide within their walls. And even worse, a king who needed money, which was nearly every medieval king, might find himself turning, hat in hand, to monks who could deny him. That humiliation hung in the air like smoke. But the Templars didn't set out to provoke kings. They simply followed their rule, their discipline, and their devotion. Still, their very existence threatened the fragile pride of rulers whose power was often more illusion than reality. Among the Templars' enemies, three groups stood out: the kings who feared their influence, the rival orders who envied their privilege, the clergy who questioned their independence. Kingdoms struggling with debt frequently blamed the order for refusing loans or enforcing strict repayment terms. Rival military orders, especially the Knights Hospitaller, competed for donations, land, and respect. Although the two orders shared a common mission, their rivalry simmered beneath polite cooperation. Hospitallers focused on healing and hospitality, while the Templars embodied uncompromising militaristic piety. When donors in Europe had to choose between the two, many favored the Templars' fearsome image, fueling resentment that lingered for generations. Clerics, too, found reasons to whisper against the order. Some accused them of acting too independently from the church, of building their own doctrines, of growing too comfortable with wealth despite their vows of poverty. Others feared that their discoveries in the East, whether relics, scriptures, or knowledge, might give them spiritual influence beyond ecclesiastical control. The church had blessed them, yes, but blessing did not equal understanding. And what the church did not understand, it often feared. But one enemy towered above the rest: King Philip IV of France. Philip was a monarch of intense ambition and crippling insecurity. He wore his crown like armor, terrified of losing control. His reign was plagued by war, debt, and political struggles. His treasury bled from repeated conflicts with England and Flanders. He had taxed clergy, expelled Jews, and seized foreign merchants' assets. Anyone who possessed wealth or influence became a target. And in the Templars, Philip saw both. To Philip, the order was an anomaly, a power center operating within his kingdom yet outside his reach. Their wealth dwarfed his. Their loyalty to the Pope challenged his authority. Their neutrality made them unpredictable. Philip despised unpredictability. Worse, he owed them an enormous debt from his failed wars. And a debt to the Templars was not a debt one could simply ignore. Philip began observing the order with the cold calculation of a man searching for weakness. He sent spies to infiltrate commanderies. He questioned Templar envoys with veiled accusations. He pressured clergy to scrutinize their activities. He waited patiently for any misstep he could exploit. But the Templars were disciplined. They made no foolish moves. Their internal unity left no cracks for Philip to exploit. So he did what ambitious kings often did when reality disappointed them. He turned to invention. Philip began quietly spreading rumors that the Templars were arrogant, corrupt, secretive to a dangerous degree. He hinted that they believed themselves above kings and popes. He whispered to advisors that their oaths bred unnatural loyalty. and slowly, methodically, he planted seeds of doubt across France. The Templars' enemies, rival orders, resentful nobles, jealous clerics, fed these rumors eagerly. They move like kings without crowns, some said. They hide relics forbidden by the church, others claimed. They bow to no authority but their own, many insisted. Every whisper made the order seem less like holy warriors and more like a rogue power. By the time Philip's spies submitted their reports, half-truths, distortions, and outright lies, the king felt justified. In his mind, the Templars were already guilty. Guilty of insubordination, guilty of wealth, guilty of secrecy, guilty of power he could not control. The enemies of the order had been gathering quietly for decades. But with Philip IV, the shadow became a storm built from fear, envy, and ambition, a storm ready to fall with crushing force. The Templars believed no king would dare confront them without cause. They were wrong. Their greatest enemies were not armies or rival faiths. Their greatest enemies were the powerful men they had once protected, men who now resented the very strength that had made the Templars indispensable. The order had survived the Holy Land. They had survived Saracen armies, scorching deserts, and impossible battles. But now they faced a more insidious threat. Enemies smiling behind Christian crosses, wielding not swords but accusations. And this time, their discipline would not be enough to save them. King Philip IV of France, Philip the Fair, was a man born into power but haunted by its fragility. He grew up watching kings fall, nations crumble, and empires splinter under the weight of war and debt. When he ascended the throne in 1285, he vowed that his reign would not suffer the same fate. Philip sought absolute authority, unquestioned, unchallenged, uncompromised. But the reality of medieval Europe was far from his iron dreams. The crown he inherited was drowning in financial chaos. Wars drained the treasury. Court expenses multiplied. Famine pushed peasants toward revolt. And the church, wealthy and influential, stood as a competitor to royal authority rather than a partner. From the beginning, Philip faced a fundamental problem. A king cannot rule absolutely if he is poor. Yet poor was exactly what he was. He had launched expensive wars against England and Flanders, each more disastrous than the last. His soldiers needed payment. His navy needed funding. His castles needed repairs. His nobles demanded compensation. And as the debts accumulated, the king grew increasingly desperate. Philip needed money, vast sums of it, faster than taxes or trade could provide. So he turned to one of the most reliable banks in Europe, the Knights Templar. The order lent to kings with caution, requiring collateral and maintaining strict records. They financed crusades, ransoms, alliances, and royal marriages. But they were not reckless. They refused to grant loans based on flattery or fear. And Philip was nothing if not accustomed to men bending under his will. When he requested enormous loans to fund his failing wars, the Templars did something no monarch expected. They said no. They refused to extend further credit when the king had not repaid previous debts. They would not drain their coffers for political ambitions that brought neither stability nor holy purpose. Their refusal was not an insult, it was policy. But to Philip, it was humiliation. A king who could not obtain money from monks looked weak. A king denied by an order he technically outranked felt mocked. And a king who already despised being indebted now found himself in a position he could not tolerate, powerless before the Templars' discipline. That moment lit a spark in Philip that would smolder for years. But money was not the only source of tension. Philip had always viewed the church and its independent institutions as obstacles to his authority. He clashed fiercely with Pope Boniface VIII and even orchestrated the Pope's humiliation. He taxed the clergy against their will. He expelled Jewish communities and seized their assets. He targeted Lombard bankers and confiscated their ledgers. Anyone with influence or wealth became a potential threat and a potential source of income. The Templars were both. They were wealthier than many kingdoms. They were loyal to the Pope, not to Philip. They had their own fortresses, armies, fleets, and financial networks. They maintained secrecy in their rituals and operated above feudal jurisdictions. And worst of all, they did not need the king. Philip, however, desperately needed them. This imbalance, this insult, grew into a silent obsession. He began studying the order, seeking weaknesses. He questioned their role, their rule, their allegiances. He harbored the belief that no entity should exist within France that he did not control. Every time he borrowed money, every time he saw Templar fleets sail independently of his own, every time he passed their fortified houses in Paris, he felt that power slipping through his fingers. And nothing was more unbearable to Philip than the fear of losing control. It didn't help that the Templars' Paris headquarters was located directly across from the royal palace. From his own windows, Philip could see the imposing walls of the temple. To him, it was a daily reminder that within the heart of his capital stood a fortress he did not command, filled with wealth he could not touch. This sight fed his resentment like a wound that refused to heal. But personal pride wasn't the only factor driving his distrust. Advisors close to Philip used the Templars as scapegoats for the crown's financial instability. They whispered that the order manipulated markets, concealed riches, and kept secrets from the world. These rumors, many fabricated, others exaggerated, played perfectly into Philip's fears. Still, despite his building hatred, Philip could not act. Not yet. The Templars were too admired, too essential, too protected by the Pope. To destroy them, Philip needed justification, something that would not only vilify the order but also give him moral authority to seize their assets. And he needed Rome to be weak enough to allow it. So Philip began working patiently. He planted seeds of doubt in the French clergy. He spread rumors through court circles. He quietly commissioned investigations into the Templars' rituals. And he waited like a hunter stalking prey. His opportunity arrived in the form of a new pope, Clement V. Clement was not a powerful, independent pontiff like Boniface VIII. He was timid, politically cautious, and deeply beholden to the French crown. Philip had supported his rise to power, and Clement knew it. Under this new, malleable papacy, Philip saw the chance to reshape the Church's relationship with the Templars, and ultimately bring them down. But before launching a full attack, Philip needed to justify his hatred. He needed Europe to believe he had reason to act. Debt provided motivation. Pride provided anger. But accusation would provide permission. So Philip's mind turned toward the oldest weapon in political warfare: defamation. He began exploring the whispers around Templar secrecy, their closed-door rituals, their mysterious symbols, their hidden hierarchies, and realized these rumors could be shaped into something far more dangerous. The Templars were vulnerable not because they were guilty, but because they had always been silent. Their silence, once a shield, would soon become the blade Philip plunged into their heart. From this moment on, the king's relationship with the Templars shifted from dependence to calculated destruction. The refusal of a loan had ignited resentment. The burden of debt had fueled greed. The Templars' independence had provoked insecurity. And Philip's thirst for absolute control turned all three into a deadly resolve. He no longer saw the Templars as allies. He no longer saw them as servants of God. He saw them as obstacles. Obstacles to his power. Obstacles to his finances. Obstacles to his legacy. And Philip the Fair, calm, cold, relentless, was a man who removed obstacles with precision. The king had begun preparing the first drafts of their downfall long before the world realized a storm was gathering. The Templars believed themselves protected by faith and honor. But they were facing a king who believed in neither. Pope Clement V entered history not as a tyrant or a visionary, but as a man caught between forces far greater and far more ruthless than himself. He was a quiet scholar, cautious, reflective, shaped more by diplomacy than conviction. When he was elected pope in 1305, he inherited a church fractured by conflict, bruised by the arrogance of his predecessors, and plagued by the ambitions of kings who sought to bend Rome to their will. He wanted peace. He wanted stability. But in trying to avoid conflict, he stepped into the deadliest political trap of the Middle Ages. And at the center of that trap was King Philip IV of France. Clement had not been elected by pure consensus. His rise was the result of delicate negotiation, whisper campaigns, and backroom promises, many of which were orchestrated or influenced by Philip. The new pope owed his position to the French crown, a fact that would haunt him throughout his rule. Philip expected gratitude, but gratitude, for a king like Philip, was not courtesy. It was obedience. The Church had long wrestled with the question of the Templars' independence. While the papacy had originally granted them special privileges, including freedom from local jurisdictions, such autonomy often clashed with bishops and kings. The order's refusal to obey secular courts frustrated monarchs. Their private ceremonies frustrated priests. Their impenetrable secrecy frustrated anyone who sought insight into their power. But until Clement V, popes had defended them, sometimes fiercely. Clement, however, was not Boniface VIII. He lacked the steel to defy kings. He lacked the political armor to withstand blackmail. He lacked the confidence to assert papal authority against royal pressure. And Philip IV recognized this weakness with predatory precision. From the moment Clement ascended the papal throne, Philip began shaping the narrative around the Templars. At first, he pressured the Pope subtly, raising concerns about corruption, hinting that the order had grown too powerful, expressing righteous worry about their secret rituals. He framed himself as a servant of the Church, a king defending the faith. Anyone who knew Philip's ambitions understood this was a facade, but Clement, isolated, insecure, and eager to avoid confrontation, listened. Still, despite Philip's persistent suggestion that the Templars were dangerous, Clement hesitated. He knew the order's value. Without the Templars, the Holy Land had fallen even faster. Without them, pilgrims would have died by the thousands. Without them, Europe's financial and military infrastructure would collapse in places where the order served as the backbone of stability. Clement respected the Templars. He admired their devotion. He knew many of their leaders personally. But admiration is fragile when a king threatens the Church itself. Philip had already shown what he was capable of. He had humiliated Pope Boniface VIII, sending soldiers to attack him in his own palace. He had forced the papacy into political retreat. He had expelled entire communities to seize their wealth. He had arrested the Knights Hospitallers' treasurer. He had manipulated trials, forged documents, and bribed clerics. Clement could see the same fire now aimed at the Templars. Yet still, the Pope resisted. He privately asked for evidence. He requested investigations. He insisted that no action be taken without papal approval. Clement's caution infuriated Philip, who wanted swift destruction, not debate. The king escalated his pressure. He sent envoys loaded with accusations, charges of heresy, idolatry, blasphemy, and unspeakable acts. He claimed former Templars had confessed. He produced witnesses, many of whom were coerced. The accusations were wild, medieval, hysterical, designed to shock. Worshipping a mysterious idol called Baphomet, spitting on the cross, engaging in indecent rituals, denying Christ during initiation, practicing sorcery, maintaining forbidden scriptures, holding secret ceremonies that mimicked pagan rites. Clement was alarmed, but not convinced. The Pope had dealt with enough kings to know that accusations could be manufactured. He insisted the Templars be questioned by church authorities, not by royal courts. He reminded Philip that the order was under papal jurisdiction alone. Philip responded with fury. Behind the scenes, the king expanded his campaign. He bribed clerics. He forged testimonies. He threatened nobles. And then, most damning of all, he began to insinuate that Clement himself might be protecting heretics. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Clement's position grew precarious. If he defended the Templars too openly, Philip could accuse him of complicity. If he opposed Philip, the king could unleash the same tactics that had broken Boniface VIII. The Pope's authority hung by a thread, and the king held the scissors. Then came the breaking point. Philip bypassed Clement entirely. Without papal approval, without warning, without legal justification, Philip ordered the mass arrest of the Templars on October 13, 1307. He seized their property, tortured their members, and extracted confessions through methods so brutal that they twisted truth into madness. Clement had been outmaneuvered. The Pope was horrified. He wrote angrily to the king, protesting the arrests and demanding that the Templars be placed under church protection. But Philip ignored him. The king knew he had the upper hand. Once the Templars had been accused publicly, once the hysteria spread, the Pope would be forced to act. To remain silent would be to appear weak or worse, complicit. Clement's authority crumbled with every passing week. Reports of torture reached Rome. Some Templars confessed under agony, then recanted, then confessed again. Bishops wrote pleading letters, unsure what to believe. The French clergy aligned with Philip. Other kingdoms grew anxious, watching France descend into chaos. Clement realized he had two choices: fight the king and risk the destruction of the papacy, or submit and sacrifice the Templars. He chose survival. Slowly, reluctantly, painfully, Clement allowed the church to investigate. He tried to protect the order by insisting on fair hearings. He stalled. He delayed. He pushed for unity among European monarchs, hoping others would resist Philip's pressure. But the king kept tightening the noose. He threatened to expose fabricated evidence. He manipulated public opinion. He forged documents implicating the Templars in heresy. He suggested that the Pope himself would be judged by how he handled the order. Clement finally yielded. In 1312, under unbearable pressure, he issued the bull Vox in excelso, formally dissolving the Knights Templar. Not because they were proven guilty, but because their existence now endangered the Church. With that single decree, the Pope extinguished one of the most powerful, disciplined, and loyal institutions in Christendom. Clement had not wanted their destruction. He had not believed the accusations. He had not trusted the king who demanded their downfall. But he was a pope who lived in the shadow of a monarch who controlled armies, manipulated courts, and had already broken a stronger pontiff. The papal chessboard had been set, and Philip had played masterfully. In the end, Clement V discovered a truth the Templars had learned too late as well. No matter how holy your mission, no matter how pure your rule, no matter how ancient your foundation, a king's ambition can silence even the voice of God's chosen leader. The accusations leveled against the Knights Templar in 1307 did not emerge from reason or evidence. They erupted from fear, manipulation, and the darkest corners of human imagination. Yet they were crafted with a deliberate brilliance that only desperate men, driven by ambition and paranoia, could conceive. King Philip IV knew that to destroy the order, he needed more than suspicion. He needed a mythology of evil, something so shocking, so unthinkable, that even the righteous would recoil. And so the great lie began to take shape. A tapestry of heresy stitched together with rumor, half-truth, distortion, and the grotesque creativity of interrogators determined to please their king. At the center of these accusations was a chilling claim. The Templars worshipped a demon. This entity, known to history as Baphomet, became the symbol of everything the order was accused of. But the origins of the name were murky. No clear definition existed before the trials. Historians suggest it might have been a corruption of Muhammad, the medieval Christian misunderstanding of Prophet Muhammad, or a mistranslation of an old French phrase, or even a deliberate fabrication by those extracting confessions. Regardless of its origins, the word carried a weight of dread, and the inquisitors wielded it with precision. Templars, under torture, were forced to confess that during their secret initiation rituals, they were shown the head of an idol, a mummified skull, a metallic relic, or a grotesque face. Some described it as bearded, others as made of silver or wood. The descriptions never matched. The idol changed shape depending on who was speaking, when they were speaking, and how much agony they were enduring. Some Templars, unable to bear the pain, repeated whatever their tormentors wanted to hear. Others, driven to madness, uttered nonsensical phrases. A few, broken beyond recognition, described visions and hallucinations that were recorded as fact. The Church and the Crown seized upon these fractured testimonies as proof of idolatry. Yet not a single idol was found. Not one head, metal or flesh, was ever uncovered in any Templar commandery. No relic matched the description. No artifact even loosely resembled the alleged Baphomet. But in an age where terror whispered louder than truth, the absence of evidence became irrelevant. The mere notion of such an idol was enough to inflame the masses. Another accusation struck at the heart of Christian devotion. The Templars were said to spit on the cross. During initiation, the novice was allegedly ordered to deny Christ, to spit upon the crucifix, or to trample it underfoot. To medieval Christians, this was the ultimate sacrilege. But the accusation had a structure suspiciously similar to survival rites used in military orders, where a novice might be symbolically tested for obedience under extreme conditions. If distorted or misunderstood, such gestures could be twisted into accusations of blasphemy. Yet even these claims contradicted everything known about the Templars. These were men who died defending the cross, literally. They charged into battle with crosses on their mantles and shields. They prayed constantly. They saw martyrdom as the highest honor. That such men secretly spat on the symbol of their faith was not only absurd, but psychologically impossible. Unless, of course, confession was extracted on the rack, where truth and falsehood could no longer be distinguished. Other charges drifted into the grotesque. The Templars were accused of encouraging forbidden acts between brothers. They were said to kiss one another in obscene places during initiation. They were accused of keeping secret texts that contradicted church doctrine. They were rumored to perform strange rites in darkness, rites with unfamiliar prayers, rites that resembled pagan ceremonies, rites that no outsider ever witnessed because, in truth, they never existed. Each accusation served a different purpose. Idolatry made them heretics. Blasphemy made them monsters. Sexual deviance made them morally corrupt. Forbidden knowledge made them dangerous. Together, they formed a story the public could not ignore, and a story kings could hide behind. But the most haunting accusation was not physical or sexual. It was spiritual. Some Templars were forced to confess that they believed the order possessed secret teachings. Teachings that revealed the church had lied, or that Christ had not died on the cross, or that salvation came from knowledge rather than doctrine. These confessions terrified the clergy, not because they were true, but because they hinted at something the church feared above all, the possibility of alternate truth. In Paris, as interrogations continued, the testimonies became a nightmarish tapestry. Templars contradicted one another. One claimed initiation involved a dark room illuminated by candles. Another described a kiss of peace on the base of the spine. Yet another insisted that secret words were whispered, words he barely remembered. The stories were inconsistent, chaotic, impossible to reconcile. The inquisitors didn't care. They wrote everything down. They compiled confessions. They created a narrative. They produced evidence based solely on the screams of tortured men. And once the story was complete, they fed it to Europe like poison disguised as wine. But beneath all this horror, a chilling question lingered. Why did these accusations capture the imagination so easily? Perhaps because the Templars had always been mysterious. Their secrecy, once respected, now appeared sinister. Their silent rituals, once symbols of discipline, now became symbols of depravity. Their closed-door ceremonies, once sacred, now seemed threatening. And the more the order denied these accusations, the more guilty they seemed in the eyes of a frightened populace. The truth is that Philip IV and his allies did not need the Templars to be guilty. They only needed them to look guilty. Heresy was the perfect crime. It required no evidence, only fear, only confession, only belief. And under the weight of torture, even the innocent would confess. The accusations of Baphomet, of blasphemy, of forbidden rites, these were not reflections of the Templars' truth. They were reflections of the world's darkest imagination, shaped by a king's hunger for control. And in the end, they became the weapon that shattered an order built on faith, loyalty, and sacrifice. The chronicles would record the accusations as if they were history. But history was never the goal. Destruction was. In the cold stone chambers of Philip IV's prisons, truth became a casualty long before the first knight was dragged inside. These were not places built for justice or reflection. They were engineered for suffering. Damp walls dripped with condensation. Iron chains clattered against the floor. The stench of sweat, blood, smoke, and fear soaked the air. Here, beneath the vaulted ceilings and torchlit corridors, the Knights Templar, once the most revered warriors of Christendom, were reduced to trembling bodies, broken voices, and souls fighting desperately to remain intact. The torture began immediately. Templars were shackled, stripped of their mantles, and thrust into rooms designed to break the human spirit. They were sleep-deprived until their minds blurred reality with hallucination. They were starved until their bodies trembled uncontrollably. They were bound so tightly that rope cut into their skin, causing wounds that festered. Some were suspended by their wrists for days, their shoulders dislocating under their own weight. Others were stretched on the rack until joints popped like snapping branches. Water was poured down their throats in suffocating surges, an early form of waterboarding that left men gasping, choking, begging for air and mercy. The interrogators were meticulous. They did not rush. They did not act out of hatred. They followed protocols designed to extract confession, not truth. Their goal was to manufacture guilt, not prove it. The king had given them a script: heresy, idolatry, obscene rituals, blasphemy. All they needed were the words, and torture was their ink. One Templar, an aging knight named Amory de Villiers, was tied to the rack until his legs twisted beneath him. When he still refused to admit to false charges, they tortured him again, this time heating iron rods until they glowed and pressing them near his skin. Not touching, just close enough for the blistering heat to terrify him. Finally, delirious, half-conscious, and broken beyond comprehension, Amory muttered a fragmented phrase. His tormentors seized upon it, twisted his words into confession, and wrote it down as evidence. Other knights resisted longer. Some held out for days, refusing to speak a single word. They prayed under their breath. They gritted their teeth. They recited scripture to keep their minds tethered to reality. But every man has limits. The interrogators pushed them precisely to that edge. And when the breaking point came, sometimes in a scream, sometimes in a whisper, those words were recorded, sealed, and added to the growing ledger of truth. There were moments of horrifying contradiction. A Templar would confess under torment, only to recant once the torture paused. In response, the inquisitors resumed the pain, cycling between agony and relief until the man's resolve shattered in new, contradictory ways. These contradictions did not matter. They were not filtered out. They were not questioned. They were compiled. The purpose was not consistency. The purpose was overwhelming volume, so many confessions that disbelief would seem irrational. In Paris, in Normandy, in Poitiers, in the fortress prisons of the Loire Valley, the pattern repeated. Dozens, hundreds, eventually thousands of testimonies. Each one extracted under duress, each dripping with the pain of men who had given their lives to the church and now watched the church turn its back on them. Some knights tried to resist spiritually, even as their bodies betrayed them. They recited the Psalms until their voices cracked. They whispered the names of fallen brothers. They tried to remind themselves that endurance was a final act of loyalty. But the human mind, when cornered by pain that will not stop, begins unraveling. Some begged to die. Others begged God to strike them dead. A few lost their sanity entirely, rambling incoherently, seeing visions that their torturers happily recorded as evidence of guilt. Among the most tragic cases were younger Templars, teenage squires or novice knights who had not yet developed the mental armor of their older counterparts. They were terrified, confused, and completely unprepared for the cruelty unleashed upon them. These young men confessed quickly, sobbing, promising full cooperation if only the pain would stop. They confessed to acts they did not understand, to rituals they had never seen, to sins they had never imagined. Their confessions became some of the most damning, simply because their youth made them seem honest. But torture does not discriminate. It destroys truth in old and young alike. Some Templars died before confessing. Their bodies, broken and battered, became silent testimonies to the brutality of Philip's campaign. Others endured the agony only to have their confessions used against their brothers. One Templar, Pierre of Bologna, reportedly watched as his companions were tortured. The sight shattered him more than his own suffering. He confessed to everything, anything, to make it stop. But amidst the torment, rare moments of defiance shone like dim flames in the darkness. Hugues de Perraud, a senior officer, endured horrific torture yet refused to confess beyond vague phrases his tormentors forced upon him. Raimbaud de Caron wept not from pain but from disbelief that Christians would do this to Christian brothers. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master himself, was chained, beaten, threatened, and yet fiercely insisted that the order was innocent, until the torture grew unbearable, and his strength cracked like shattered stone. For the inquisitors, these men were victories. For history, they were tragedies. The Church received these confessions with mixed horror and hesitation. Some clerics saw the torture for what it was, a grotesque manipulation of justice. Others, too afraid to oppose the king, looked away. A few believed the confessions outright, interpreting tortured lies as divine revelation. Philip's plan was working. Confessions flowed like blood. Testimonies multiplied. Doubt spread. Even the innocent began to wonder. Had someone, somewhere in the order, indeed done something wrong? Such is the nature of psychological warfare. Torture does not only break the body. It erodes the very idea of truth. As the months passed, the Templars were no longer seen as noble warriors, but as men whose own words damned them, even when those words had been torn from them under agony. And yet, in the stillness of night, when the torches burned low and chains rattled with the shifting of exhausted bodies, a deeper, more haunting question lingered in the corridors of those prisons. If the Templars were innocent, why were the king and his courts willing to resort to such monstrous cruelty? What secret were they so desperate to bury beneath the screams? For in the echoes of the torture chambers, beyond the sobs and confessions and lies, one truth remained. The Templars were not being interrogated to discover guilt. They were being tortured to manufacture it. In the wake of the mass arrests, amidst the chaos of confessions extracted by torment and the swelling hysteria gripping France, one figure stood at the center of it all. A man whose courage, dignity, and tragedy would echo through the centuries. Jacques de Molay, the 23rd and final Grand Master of the Knights Templar. For decades he had led the order through wars, political storms, and devastating defeats in the Holy Land. He was a seasoned commander, a respected diplomat, and a man of unwavering faith. But nothing in his lifetime of service could have prepared him for the grotesque spectacle that awaited him in Philip Ivy's courts. When de Molay was first arrested on that dark morning of October 13, 1307, he believed it was a mistake, a misunderstanding that would be resolved within days. The Templars had always answered to the Pope. They had always served Christendom faithfully. They had always been protected by papal authority. Surely the accusations were absurd enough that one honest hearing would dismiss them. But he underestimated the depth of Philip's hatred, and the fear gripping Clement V. De Molay was taken to Paris, where he was imprisoned in a damp, dim cell within the temple towers. Ironically, a fortress his own brothers had built. Over the next weeks, he endured interrogations that turned harsher and more surreal with each passing day. As the accusations piled up, he remained steadfast, refusing to confess to crimes he had not committed. But the torturers were relentless. Stripped, bound, stretched, beaten, suffocated, threatened with burning. Jacques de Molay, once a noble knight, was reduced to a trembling figure struggling to hold onto truth as pain threatened to rip it away. No amount of physical endurance could withstand the relentless, calculated cruelty inflicted upon him. Eventually, like many of his brothers, he broke. Whether delirious or coerced, he muttered fragments of confession, words his captors seized with triumphant satisfaction. With ink-stained quills and cold eyes, they wrote every phrase as proof of guilt. They had forced the Grand Master of the greatest military order in Christendom to confess. In their minds, the battle was over. But they did not understand Jacques de Molay. When the torture ended, clarity returned. His body was shattered, but his spirit rekindled. He recanted immediately, insisting his words were lies spoken under unbearable pain. His recantation enraged his captors, but it also revealed something far more dangerous for the crown. De Molay could not be easily silenced. A broken man might be pitied, but a broken man who stands back up becomes a threat. Months turned into years. Courts were convened. Panels of bishops interviewed Templars. Political pressure twisted every proceeding. Some clerics truly believed the accusations. Others were too frightened to challenge the king. A few protested the legitimacy of torture-induced confessions, but their voices were drowned beneath the weight of royal intimidation. Finally, in 1310, 3 years after the arrests, a major inquiry brought high-ranking Templars, including de Molay, before a panel of church officials. The Grand Master, still recovering from torture, stepped forward to speak. His hair was gray, his face gaunt, but his presence unwavering. He declared that the confessions were false, that the order was innocent, and that he would rather die than betray his brothers again through lies. His words stunned the court. Many expected a broken man resigned to survival. Instead, they saw a leader rising through agony like a phoenix through smoke. His recantation was so powerful, so sincere, that several bishops expressed doubt about the charges. A few even suggested acquittal. But Philip's agents acted swiftly. They silenced sympathetic clerics, threatened dissenters, and ensured that the proceedings bent toward the king's will. Still, Jacques de Molay's integrity unsettled the crown. So Philip escalated. He staged a dramatic sentencing ceremony on March 18, 1314, at the Parvis of Notre Dame in Paris. Platform was erected. Crowds gathered. Royal officials expected the Grand Master to bow, confess, and request mercy. It was a public ritual, a performance designed to break the last symbol of Templar resistance and justify their annihilation. Before the crowd, church cardinals announced the sentences. De Molay and 3 senior officers were to spend their remaining years in prison, in isolation, their order dissolved and disgraced. But then the unexpected happened. As the officials turned to leave, Jacques de Molay stepped forward. His voice, hoarse but steady, rose above the murmuring crowd. He denounced the trial as a lie. He proclaimed the order's innocence. He declared his earlier confessions forced by torture. He asked God to judge between truth and falsehood. The shock was immediate. Royal officers froze. Cardinals gasped. The crowd erupted in murmurs. De Molay had openly defied the king and the church in the heart of Paris. He had shattered the scripted narrative with a single act of courage. Philip IV was furious. No king could allow such defiance, especially not from a man he had built an entire campaign upon condemning. With cold, instantaneous authority, Philip ordered de Molay and Geoffroy de Charnay burned alive as relapsed heretics. No consultation with the Pope. No delay. No appeal. The execution was arranged within hours. That evening, on a small island in the Seine, Isle de la Cite, 2 pyres were erected. The flames reflected off the dark water. Crowds gathered again, drawn by horror and fascination. The Grand Master was taken to the stake. His hands were bound, his body weakened, but his eyes burned with unbroken defiance. As the fire was lit, Jacques de Molay did something no one expected. He spoke. He cried out to God, declaring the order's purity, forgiving his torturers, and calling upon God to judge the guilty. Then, turning toward the royal palace and the papal representative, he proclaimed a prophecy. God knows who is wrong and has sinned. Soon calamity shall befall those who have condemned us. Before a year passes, both Pope Clement and King Philip shall stand before the judgment of God. The flames rose. The crowd fell silent. The Grand Master of the Knights Templar died standing, unbroken, unyielding, and unafraid. What happened next shook Europe. Within a month, Pope Clement V died of illness. Within 7 months, Philip IV died suddenly during a hunting trip. The prophecy was fulfilled, and in their deaths the truth became impossible to ignore. The trial had been a lie. The accusations were a weapon. And Jacques de Molay's final stand became the spark of a legend that would never die. The trial of the Grand Master was not just a tragedy. It was a reckoning. A moment when honor stood alone against corruption, and a dying knight turned his execution into a curse that echoed across centuries. In that moment, Jacques de Molay stopped being a victim. He became a symbol. In the days and weeks following the mass arrests of the Templars, something strange began to happen. Something that neither King Philip nor his agents anticipated. While France fell into chaos, while accusations spread like wildfire, while trials and interrogations took center stage, unsettling reports surfaced from the coast. Entire Templar ports, armories, and commanderies had been found empty. Not looted, not destroyed, abandoned. Supplies were gone. Ledgers missing. Ships vanished. What Philip believed would be a total, coordinated capture had only succeeded in France. Across the rest of Europe, many Templars were warned, protected, or simply gone before royal orders arrived. In places like England, Aragon, Portugal, and Germany, arrests were slow, resisted, or symbolic. But nowhere was the mystery greater than along the French coastline, where the order had maintained one of its most important assets. A naval presence that was far more capable and far more independent than most European kings realized. At the heart of that mystery was the port of La Rochelle. La Rochelle was not just another harbor. It was the Templars' maritime gateway to the Atlantic. The order used it to transport supplies to the Holy Land, move treasure and goods across regions, and maintain communication lines that bypassed royal scrutiny. It was a stronghold of efficiency, loyalty, and secrecy. When royal officials arrived there expecting to seize ships, gold, and personnel, they found something confounding. The port was nearly empty. The Templar fleet, small but disciplined, had vanished. Witnesses, though fearful of speaking openly, whispered of an operation carried out with uncanny precision. They claimed that in the days before the arrests, Templar ships were quietly loaded at night by brothers working under hushed orders. Cargo was transferred with speed and secrecy. Horses were boarded. Chests were carried aboard, chests that required multiple men to lift. No one knew what was inside, but those who watched from the shadows reported that the brothers moved as if on sacred mission, following instructions given long before the king's purge began. At dawn on October 12th, just hours before the arrests, several Templar vessels slipped out of La Rochelle's harbor, their sails hugging the mist. No direction was recorded. No manifest was left behind. The ships vanished into the gray horizon without a trace. Philip's agents were livid. They had expected treasure, ledgers, evidence, anything that could justify the accusations and enrich the crown. Instead, they found only empty docks and scattered crates. Rumors spread quickly through the city, filling taverns and alleyways with speculation. Where had the fleet gone? What had they been carrying? Why had they left so suddenly? Some believed the ships fled to Portugal, where the Templars were favored by King Denis. Others whispered that they sailed north toward Scotland, a land embroiled in conflict with England and thus an unlikely place for French influence. A few proposed they headed further still to Ireland or Scandinavia, and many, embracing the power of legend, insisted the fleet crossed the Atlantic itself, seeking refuge in unknown lands far beyond European reach. But what mattered most was not where the ships went, but what they carried. The Templars were not impulsive men. They did not flee out of panic. Their oaths bound them to obedience and forethought. If they prepared their fleet to disappear, it was because they anticipated the danger. It meant warnings reached them days or even weeks before Philip's orders. It meant someone, perhaps within the French court, perhaps within the church, had alerted them to the coming storm. As news spread of the vanished fleet, similar accounts emerged from inland commanderies. In Champagne, Burgundy, and the Rhône Valley, royal forces arrived to find strong rooms emptied, documents missing, horses gone. In some places, the Templars had departed only hours earlier, leaving behind warm hearths and extinguished candles. In others, they had disappeared silently in the night, taking with them everything the crown desired. This uncanny coordination became one of the most enduring mysteries of the order's fall. How did they know? How did they mobilize so quickly across multiple regions? How did they manage to communicate warnings while under such scrutiny? The most plausible explanation was the one kings feared most. The Templars had an internal communication network far more sophisticated than any medieval state. Their couriers traveled fast. Their message codes were precise. Their discipline allowed them to act as a single organism, even when scattered across continents. So when the alarm was sounded, they did not hesitate. They followed predetermined protocols meant for emergencies, protocols that Philip and his advisors never imagined existed. These protocols went beyond fleeing. They involved dispersing assets, hiding relics, safeguarding documents, and protecting knowledge. The Templars were not merely evacuating, they were preserving something. Something they believed must not fall into the hands of those who sought their destruction. The fleets and strongboxes were not treasure for personal gain. They held records, relics, coded ledgers, sealed correspondence, and possibly items recovered from beneath the Temple Mount centuries earlier. If such objects did exist, the Templars would have guarded them above all else. As the Templars disappeared from their strongholds, Europe was left with a haunting image. Fortresses standing empty, halls silent, ports abandoned, roads devoid of riders. They had melted into the world like ghosts. Some were captured in later sweeps. Some integrated into other orders. Some returned to civilian life. But many, especially those involved with the Order's most sensitive operations, vanished entirely. Their fate remains unknown. In time, legends would claim that the surviving Templars carried their greatest secrets into exile, that they became custodians of hidden knowledge, that they resurfaced in new identities, new brotherhoods, new lands, that the fleet of La Rochelle was not a retreat, but the beginning of a new chapter, one written far from the reach of kings. What is certain is this: when Philip sought to crush the Templars, he believed he had taken everything from them. But he had failed to grasp the depth of their discipline, the scale of their networks, and the power of their unity. The Templars did not vanish because they were defeated. They vanished because they chose to, carrying with them secrets the king would never touch. As the Templars dissolved into the shadows of Europe, the question that echoed across every tavern, castle hall, and monastic cloister was simple, but terrifying in its implications. Where did the surviving knights go? France was no longer safe. Philip's agents hunted them relentlessly. Their commanderies were seized, their lands confiscated, their identities outlawed. Yet the Order had not simply vanished. It had scattered. This scattering was not chaos. It was movement, purposeful, precise, and guided by centuries of discipline. The brothers who escaped France carried with them more than fear. They carried knowledge, documents, coded messages, and possibly relics that the Order had protected since their earliest days beneath the Temple Mount. Their paths diverged across Europe like hidden tributaries flowing away from a broken river. Some found refuge in kingdoms sympathetic to their plight. Others disappeared into rural lands, shedding their mantles and becoming ordinary farmers, blacksmiths, or wanderers. But a significant number followed three primary escape routes shaped by politics, geography, and centuries-old alliances. The first sanctuary lay to the west, Portugal. Portugal, unlike France, was ruled by a man who admired the Templars deeply. King Denis, known as the Farmer King, a monarch as wise as he was protective. The Templars had played a crucial role in securing Portuguese territory during the Reconquista. They built castles, defended borderlands, and supported the growth of Christian settlements. Their service was woven into the kingdom's very foundation. When news of Philip's purge reached Lisbon, Denis refused to participate. He did not arrest the Templars. He did not seize their lands. Instead, he assessed the political landscape and realized something that other rulers feared to admit. The destruction of the Templars was a French ambition, not a divine judgment. Denis saw the truth and acted decisively. Rather than leave the Templars vulnerable to international condemnation, he reinvented them. He created a new order, the Order of Christ, a military and monastic institution that inherited the Templars' lands, fortresses, responsibilities, and, most importantly, their surviving members. Former Templars simply moved their white mantles aside and donned the red cross of a new brotherhood. Their traditions continued. Their knowledge survived. Their hierarchy lived on, disguised beneath a different name. This was not a rebirth, it was a preservation. Centuries later, the Order of Christ would fund Portuguese exploration, sending caravels across the Atlantic and around Africa. Many historians believe the navigational techniques and coded maps associated with the Age of Discovery were rooted, in part, in ancient Templar knowledge preserved through this transformation. The second sanctuary was further north, Scotland. Scotland in the early 14th century was an embattled kingdom resisting English occupation. Its king, Robert the Bruce, had been excommunicated by the Pope for political rebellion. Outside the Church's favor, Bruce owed nothing to Rome, and even less to France. When the Templars were condemned across Christendom, Scotland became one of the few places where papal pressure held no authority. Many Templars fled there, crossing seas and rugged landscapes, knowing they would find a king who not only welcomed them but needed them. They offered him something priceless: military skill, siege expertise, and a disciplined fighting force. Legend claims that Templars fought alongside Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, just months after de Molay's execution, arriving as reinforcements at a crucial moment, turning the tide in Scotland's favor. Chroniclers speak of mysterious knights who charged with unnatural precision, bearing symbols unfamiliar to Scottish forces. Whether myth or truth, the story persists because it reflects a deeper possibility: that the Templars, stripped of their identity, found a new purpose in a kingdom that mirrored their determination for survival. And Scotland, fiercely independent and geographically isolated, became a natural refuge for men who had been cast out by every other European power. The third sanctuary lay in secrecy itself. Some Templars didn't flee to kingdoms. They fled to anonymity. The medieval world was vast and often lawless beyond the walls of major cities. Mountain villages, forest settlements, island communities, and rural farmlands offered places to disappear without trace. These Templars shed their uniforms, buried or burned incriminating documents, and lived out their days quietly. But even without the mantle, they carried the order's values, teachings, and intelligence. Others sought refuge in monastic communities, integrating themselves into other orders: the Hospitallers, the Cistercians, the Teutonic Knights, bringing with them fragments of Templar tradition, quietly influencing the structures they entered. Some joined merchant guilds, becoming traders, ship captains, masons, or explorers. Their international experience and discipline made them valuable in industries that demanded trust and organization. These Templars did not merely survive. They melted into the world and reshaped it from within. But among the most persistent rumors is that some Templars carried their knowledge and symbols into secret brotherhoods that emerged in the centuries to follow. Among these groups, the Freemasons are often cited as having inherited elements of Templar ritual, architecture, and esoteric symbolism. While concrete evidence is scarce, the parallels in structure, secrecy, and lore create tantalizing possibilities. The idea that Templar tradition survived, not in castles or armies, but in encoded rituals and philosophical societies, has fueled centuries of speculation. Another strand of legend speaks of Templars who fled even further, sailing across the Atlantic long before Columbus. The vanished fleet of La Rochelle is often connected to stories of early voyages to the Americas. Indigenous tales, stone carvings, and medieval maps hint, though never conclusively, that European visitors reached distant shores long before official exploration. Whether these legends are myth or remnants of forgotten truths, one fact remains unshakable: the Templar Order did not die in 1307. It changed its shape. It divided its presence. It hid its most precious knowledge. It dissolved its structure only to allow its ideas to continue. The Western escape routes were not the retreat of a defeated order. They were the strategic movements of men trained for centuries to think beyond kingdoms, beyond borders, beyond fear. As the Church and the Crown tore down their visible world, the Templars quietly built an invisible one, woven through Portugal's reborn order, Scotland's rebellious independence, and the scattered brotherhoods that survived in whispers and symbols. In fleeing, they preserved what mattered most: not their lands, not their wealth, not their armor, but their knowledge, their unity, their legacy. The Templars had lost the Holy Land. They had lost their titles. They had lost their order. But they had not lost themselves. For generations, the Knights Templar had stood as guardians of the sacred, warriors who shed blood for relics believed to hold the keys to Christian history. But when the order fell, a far deeper mystery resurfaced. What exactly had they been protecting all these years? And more importantly, what relics, documents, or forbidden knowledge escaped capture with the surviving brothers? The world of the Middle Ages was a world of relics. Faith was tangible, expressed through objects believed to carry divine presence. A vial of holy oil, a splinter of the true cross, a saint's bone, a cloth touched by sacred hands. These items inspired pilgrimages, built cathedrals, and gave legitimacy to kings. Yet none commanded more awe, more secrecy, or more myth than the relics associated with Christ himself. The Templars' proximity to Jerusalem placed them closer to these sacred remnants than any group in medieval Europe. Their headquarters stood atop the Temple Mount. Their patrols guarded roads pilgrims used to reach Golgotha and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Their commanderies sat near ancient tombs and shrines, where relic hunters and mystics searched relentlessly for traces of biblical history. It was inevitable that in these searchings, intentional or accidental, the Templars encountered relics that reshaped their identity. Among the most enduring legends is the belief that the Templars found or safeguarded the Holy Grail. In medieval storytelling, the Grail took many forms: a chalice, a stone, a dish, a vessel of life, a symbol of divine knowledge. Some described it as the cup Jesus used at the Last Supper. Others believed it held his blood from the crucifixion. Still others said it wasn't a physical object at all, but spiritual insight, knowledge too dangerous for ordinary believers. Templar lore merged with Grail mythology as stories increasingly portrayed knights guarding the Grail in hidden castles or carrying it across dark waters. Troubadours, poets, and mystics wove the Templars into a tapestry of legends where the sacred cup was never just an artifact. It was a truth that could transform the soul. Whether literal or symbolic, these stories suggested one thing: the Templars were associated with a revelation so profound that it had to be concealed. Yet there were other relics tied to their name, relics more concrete, more historical, and far more unsettling. One of the most mysterious is the Shroud, or more specifically, a cloth later known as the Shroud of Turin. The first confirmed appearance of the Shroud in Europe occurred decades after the Order's fall, but its origin remains fiercely debated. Some historians argue it surfaced in the possession of a former Templar family. Others claim it was displayed in a region where Templar survivors had settled. The Templars, with their secretive rituals involving a mysterious bearded head, were later accused of worshipping an idol, a distorted description that some believe might have stemmed from a relic resembling a burial cloth with a faint human image. Was the idol head a tortured memory of a sacred relic shown to initiates in ceremonies too poorly understood by outsiders? Was it a misinterpretation of a sacred object treated with reverence, not idolatry? The answer remains elusive. Other accounts speak of fragmentary scrolls and hidden scriptures, texts that contradicted church teachings or recorded early Christian traditions suppressed over time. Arab chroniclers noted that the Templars possessed writings taken from ancient repositories in Jerusalem. Jewish scholars claimed the order protected lost fragments of the Old Testament or apocryphal books. Some suggested they uncovered genealogical records, documents connected to Davidic bloodlines or early dynasties the Church preferred to forget. Still others linked the Templars to relics connected not to Christ, but to Solomon, rings, keys, or texts containing esoteric wisdom. The Temple of Solomon, revered across Abrahamic tradition, was believed to house objects of immense symbolic power. If the Templars truly excavated beneath the mount, it is not impossible that they found remnants of rituals, symbols, or implements associated with ancient Jewish priesthoods. And then there were the claims of the Ark of the Covenant, the most dangerous relic of all. Stories circulated that the Ark had been hidden before the Babylonian invasion, and that its resting place remained beneath the Temple Mount. Some believed the Templars found clues or tunnels connected to this legendary object. A few even suggested they recovered parts of it or discovered writings describing its true location. Though no physical evidence supports this, the persistence of the legend speaks to something deeper. The Templars were believed capable of discovering secrets with the power to reshape theology and politics alike. But what makes these relics so compelling is not the objects themselves. It's the way they blur together in the fog of history. Were they literal artifacts? Were they symbolic teachings? Were they forbidden writings? Or were they misunderstood rituals rooted in ancient tradition? During their trials, Templars repeatedly claimed that their ceremonies involved sacred symbols, not idols. They insisted their rituals were misunderstood. They spoke of knowledge passed between brothers, knowledge that could not be shared with outsiders, especially those already poisoned by political deception. Some modern historians suggest that the Templars' treasure was not a physical hoard at all. It was knowledge of early Christian rites predating the Church's consolidation of doctrine, knowledge of esoteric practices borrowed from Eastern mystics, knowledge of ancient Jewish traditions preserved through centuries, knowledge of archaeological findings beneath the Temple Mount. If this knowledge contradicted church doctrine, Philip and his advisors would have seen it as a threat great enough to justify the order's annihilation. Whatever the truth, one fact cannot be denied. When the Templars fled France, they carried with them something more valuable than gold, something they believed must never fall into the hands of kings or corrupt clerics. The treasure of the deep vault was not precious metal. It was meaning, memory, legacy, truth, perhaps dangerous, perhaps misunderstood, but powerful enough that men were willing to die for it. In the aftermath of the Purge, Europe was left haunted by questions it could not answer. What relics did the Templars safeguard? What scriptures did they protect? What sacred mysteries did they vow to keep hidden? The order had risen in secrecy and fallen in secrecy. But the relics, whether physical, symbolic, or spiritual, remained the beating heart of the legends that survived. For in those relics, real or imagined, lay the possibility that the Templars guarded not just treasures of stone and cloth, but truths that could reshape the world if ever fully revealed. For nearly 2 centuries, the Knights Templar guarded their inner truths with a silence so absolute that not even kings or popes could penetrate it. But the most enduring and unsettling whispers claim that beneath the Temple of Solomon, deep in the ancient bedrock carved by civilizations long vanished, the Templars uncovered something far more transformative than relics of wood or stone. They found words, fragmented scriptures, hidden writings, dead languages carved into crumbling walls, texts so old, so foreign to medieval understanding, that they defied easy interpretation. These were not the relics of saints or prophets familiar to the Church. They were older, infinitely older, and hinted at a story of faith, humanity, and divine origin far more complicated than the Orthodox narrative allowed. The idea that the Templars recovered forbidden scripture is not a modern fantasy. It is rooted in the quiet panic that rippled through royal courts and papal circles during their rise. Even in their earliest years, Templars were recorded studying ancient scrolls alongside priests and rabbis. They sought translators, consulted scholars, and copied texts no one could explain. Muslim chroniclers noted their interest in the writings of the ancients. Jewish families near Jerusalem claimed the Knights paid handsomely for access to genealogical scrolls. And the diverse intellectual currents of the Holy Land, Greek, Syriac, Hebrew, Coptic, Arabic, flowed into their hands with ease. These weren't accidents. The Templars were searching. Under the Temple Mount, they mapped tunnels, removed debris, traced inscriptions, and uncovered sealed chambers untouched for centuries. When they found scroll fragments, they preserved them. When they found stone carvings, they sketched them. Some of these fragments traveled back to Europe, hidden in chests sewn into clothing, or smuggled in innocuous bundles of cloth. Most disappeared before Philip's men could seize them, and that disappearance only deepened the mystery. What exactly did these writings contain? Some historians believe they uncovered early Judaic texts, books excluded from the later biblical canon, writings that revealed alternate histories or interpretations the Church did not sanction. Others suspect they found documents related to the priesthood of Solomon's temple, ritual instructions, genealogies, or mystical teachings rooted in Kabbalistic tradition. These texts, if genuine, would have been considered dangerous not because they were false, but because they preserved elements of a tradition far older than Christianity. There are also theories, provocative and unsettling, that the Templars stumbled upon early Christian writings suppressed during the formation of church doctrine. Fragments of Gospels that contradicted accepted accounts. Teachings emphasizing personal enlightenment over church authority. Texts hinting at metaphor, symbolism, or human complexity in the life of Christ. Ideas considered heretical in the rigid medieval world. Still others imagine they found documents connected to the Essenes, the mystical Jewish sect believed to have authored the Dead Sea Scrolls. Their teachings emphasized purity, communal living, apocalyptic expectation, and hidden knowledge, parallels that would resonate deeply with a monastic military order like the Templars. But the most controversial theory suggests something even more profound, that the Templars uncovered evidence of religious continuity, proof that Judaism, Christianity, and even pre-Judaic traditions shared a common origin far older than anyone realized. If true, such a discovery would threaten the foundations of medieval faith. Kings derived legitimacy from divine right. Popes derived authority from apostolic succession. The structure of European society depended on a single, continuous, unbroken theological narrative. Anything that challenged that narrative, even slightly, was explosive. Whatever the truth, the Templars did not treat these writings as curiosities. They studied them, they memorized them, they debated them in secret among their most trusted officers. This was knowledge that shaped the soul of the order, knowledge they protected with fervent loyalty. And then something curious happened. As the Templars expanded through Europe, their architectural projects began to incorporate symbolism not fully aligned with standard Christian iconography. Their churches adopted octagonal shapes reminiscent of early Eastern temples. Their chapels featured geometric designs echoing Jewish mysticism. Their ritual spaces were constructed with mathematical precision more aligned with ancient esoteric traditions than Western Christianity. Even their initiation rites, so often misunderstood as heretical, contained echoes of ancient purification ceremonies rather than pagan blasphemy. To their supporters, these elements reflected wisdom. To their enemies, they suggested heresy. When Philip's accusations exploded, even the most outlandish claims, worshipping a head, denying Christ, spitting on the cross, could be twisted from kernels of misunderstood practice. A textual fragment venerated during initiation could become an idol worshipped in secret. A symbolic renouncement rite could become spitting on the cross. A cleansing ceremony could be framed as mocking Christ. But what terrifies an insecure king more than anything? Knowledge he cannot control, especially knowledge that could challenge the church's monopoly on truth. Imagine a scroll suggesting that divinity is found within the individual rather than bestowed through a priest. Imagine a text hinting that early Christian teachings were more diverse than the church admitted. Imagine a genealogy that undermined royal claims to biblical lineage. Imagine a narrative revealing that history had been shaped by political edits masquerading as divine will. Such knowledge would be more dangerous than any sword. Could ignite revolution. Could dismantle kingdoms. Could unmake the church. The Templars understood this danger. They understood it so deeply that when their destruction began, they prioritized something above survival: protection of their texts. This explains why their archives were emptied so quickly, why certain chests were smuggled out before arrests, why couriers fled France in the dead of night, why no truly incriminating records were ever found, why Philip's men seized gold but not truth. It also explains why, even under torture, many Templars refused to speak of the order's deeper teachings. They would rather die than betray what they believed they were sworn to preserve. By the time the order was dissolved, fragments of these writings had vanished into the hands of surviving brothers. Some likely traveled to Portugal, others to Scotland. A few, perhaps, sailed across the Atlantic. Their contents, unknown to us, became the most valuable inheritance of the Templar diaspora. The world would never again possess the full truth of what the Templars uncovered beneath the Temple Mount. But in the centuries that followed, in the rise of esoteric brotherhoods, in the evolution of mystical thought, in the architectural breakthroughs of Europe, in the philosophical currents that challenged church authority, echoes of their forbidden scripture can be felt, like a quiet heartbeat beneath the noise of history. The Templars had found something. Not gold, not the Grail, Not the Arkansas, but something infinitely more dangerous. Knowledge that could rewrite the story of God and man. In the aftermath of their dramatic fall, with their lands seized and their brothers tortured or scattered across Europe, the Knights Templar slipped into the shadows of history. But shadows are not empty. They are places where stories grow. And as the world tried to make sense of the Order's sudden and violent destruction, whispers began to form. Whispers that the Templars had not merely been victims of political ambition, but custodians of truths and codes too dangerous for the medieval world to bear. These whispers evolved, intertwined, and eventually crystallized into one of the most enduring families of questions in Western history. What if the Templars survived? Not just as refugees, but as an invisible brotherhood? The idea is not as fanciful as it first appears. When a structured, disciplined organization disappears, its form dissolves, but its influence lingers. Its knowledge lingers. Its symbols linger. And those symbols, carried silently by surviving brothers into new lands and new identities, may have shaped the foundations of societies that emerged in the centuries that followed. The most famous of these alleged descendants is Freemasonry, a widespread fraternal order that rose to prominence in the 17th and 18th centuries. Freemasonry often presents itself as a guild of builders, philosophical architects dedicated to moral development and symbolic enlightenment. But the deeper one looks into its rituals, iconography, and myths, the more unmistakable the echoes of the Templars become. The similarities begin with architecture. Templar chapels frequently adopted octagonal or circular designs, structures modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Freemason lodges, centuries later, emphasized sacred geometry, symbolic proportions, and the metaphysics of building, ideas central to Templar architecture. Some Masonic rites reenact the construction of Solomon's Temple, a site the Templars once literally occupied and explored, and many Masonic legends refer to lost words, hidden teachings, or the architect who guards the secret, all of which mirror Templar traditions of sacred knowledge. Then there is the matter of symbols. The Templars used a range of iconography that confused medieval observers. Double crossbars, geometric emblems, mysterious seals of two knights riding a single horse. These symbols appear, transformed but recognizable, in early Masonic manuscripts. Even the Templars' Red Cross resurfaces in certain Masonic rites, particularly within the York Rite and the Order of the Red Cross, organizations that explicitly reference the legacy of the Templars. Could this be coincidence? Perhaps, but coincidences multiply quickly when viewed through the lens of survival. After Portugal absorbed the Templars into the Order of Christ, that same order later funded the voyages of Henry the Navigator. The sailors who pushed past the edges of the known world often flew crosses nearly identical to Templar insignia. Maps that guided early explorers contained geometric alignments reminiscent of Templar cartographic methods. And from this era of exploration emerged a new intellectual climate, one embracing inquiry, science, and symbolism that would later nurture the growth of Freemasonry. In Scotland, where many Templars found sanctuary after 1307, a unique architectural tradition evolved, stone guilds that eventually became speculative lodges. These lodges preserved the rituals of builders, but also absorbed the stories and symbols of knights who lived among them. Scottish Freemasonry is often considered the oldest ceremonial masonry in the world, and early records undeniably place former Templars in the same regions where these lodges formed. But the issue goes deeper than architecture or symbols. It goes to structure. Both the Templars and the Freemasons share a hierarchy based on degrees. Secret rites restricted to initiates. Passwords, signs, and coded teachings. Meetings held in private, guarded chambers. A commitment to moral duty and mutual support. A mythic origin tied to the Temple of Solomon. These connections may be metaphorical, or they may be literal threads woven across centuries by men who carried memories of a fallen brotherhood. Another branch of legend suggests that Templar knowledge influenced Rosicrucian circles, esoteric groups that emerged in the early 1600s preaching alchemical transformation, hidden wisdom, and the unity of spiritual traditions. Their manifestos spoke of ancient teachings rediscovered, of hermetic knowledge preserved through crisis, and of secret brotherhoods waiting for the right moment to reemerge. Many of their ideas resembled Templar-era mystical interpretations of scripture and ancient texts. Still others point to the Priory of Chaon, a shadowy organization alleged, rightly or wrongly, to preserve secrets related to the bloodline of Christ. Though most modern claims about the Priory of Chaon are fabrications, the underlying story persists because it mirrors a historical fear that the Templars might have discovered genealogical knowledge capable of shaking the foundations of medieval power. Finally, some legends suggest Templar survival in unexpected ways. Hidden rural communities, family lineages carrying coded heirlooms, underground movements influencing political upheavals, and even early democratic ideals whispered into the ears of emerging thinkers. These ideas may be bold, but the world that emerged after the Templars fell was a world transformed. The Renaissance exploded with an obsession for ancient texts, echoing the Templars' own tradition of collecting them. Explorers crossed oceans under banners strikingly similar to Templar symbols. Revolutionaries in America and France used language and iconography reminiscent of Templar and Masonic teachings. Secret societies multiplied, many drawing their mythology from a lost chivalric order. Coincidence becomes increasingly implausible. Yet the question remains, did the Templars deliberately seed the brotherhoods that followed? Or did remnants of their structure simply re-emerge wherever their surviving members settled? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Perhaps the order's false scattered seeds that sprouted in unexpected soil, philosophical traditions, symbolic systems, ritualistic frameworks, and ethical teachings carried quietly through generations by men who never forgot their oath. When an organization dies, its body disappears. But its ideas, if powerful enough, cannot be buried. And the Templars' ideas were powerful indeed. Loyalty, discipline, secrecy, sacred knowledge, and the union of faith with reason. These ideas would echo through Europe again and again, shaping new movements and brotherhoods long after the last Templar fortress fell. The world may never know whether Freemasonry or other secret orders were direct descendants of the Templars, or simply spiritual heirs. But one thing is undeniable. When the Templars vanished from history, they did not leave emptiness behind. They left a blueprint of symbols, codes, mysteries, and teachings that would shape secret societies for centuries to come, binding the medieval past to the modern world through whispers, rituals, and the enduring possibility that the Templars never truly died. In the centuries following the fall of the Knights Templar, a strange, persistent pulse began to move beneath the surface of Europe. A rhythm of symbols, alignments, cryptic markers, and architectural oddities that scholars, mystics, and travelers would spend lifetimes trying to decipher. If the Templars were truly annihilated in 1307, then these mysteries would be nothing more than coincidence. But if surviving brothers fled with their knowledge, as evidence suggests, then Europe itself may have become a silent map of their passing, a network of clues hidden in plain sight. It begins with architecture, the language of stone. Templar churches were unlike anything built by their contemporaries. Instead of the standard rectangular layout, their most sacred chapels were often circular or polygonal, a direct homage to the Dome of the Rock, the site of their earliest headquarters in Jerusalem. This design was meant to echo the Temple of Solomon itself, and its deliberate use in Europe stands as a symbolic anchor for the order's origins. These distinctive chapels appear across France, England, Spain, and Portugal. But what's stranger still is their placement. Many of them align with geographic patterns, triangulations spanning hundreds of miles. When mapped, their locations form geometric shapes. Isosceles triangles, lines that track ancient pilgrimage routes, or points that correspond to astronomical movements. Coincidence? Or a hidden warning? Or perhaps a signal meant for other surviving brothers? In Portugal, where the Order of Christ preserved Templar traditions, the architectural clues deepen. At Tomar, a citadel built by the Templars and later inherited by the Order, mysterious carvings cover the walls. Ropes, knots, stars, and coded shapes. One chamber, known as the Initiate's Room, contains symbols that scholars still struggle to interpret. Its octagonal rotunda echoes the sacred proportions of ancient temples. Every dimension is steeped in mathematical significance. Then there are the portals, doorways carved with strange, spiraling patterns that appear too deliberate to be decoration. Some believe these carvings represent the journey of the soul. Others think they encode teachings forbidden by the Church. And still others claim they mark the presence of relics or hidden chambers sealed centuries ago. But architecture is only the beginning. Across Europe, stone carvings and reliefs appear in places with clear Templar history, symbols that resemble Hebrew letters, Eastern talismans, alchemical diagrams, and geometric patterns associated with mysticism. These carvings appear not only in Templar strongholds but also in rural chapels, manor houses, and even bridges constructed by stonemason guilds during the 14th to 16th centuries. The symbols are too consistent, too recurrent to be random. They trace a cultural inheritance, a passing of knowledge from one generation to the next, quiet, careful, intentional. Many of these symbols reappear centuries later in Masonic ritual books, carved onto the walls of Scottish lodges, etched into English cathedrals, and hidden in the ornamentation of Renaissance-era manuscripts. The Templars may not have founded these later orders, but someone carried their symbols forward, transcribing them into new traditions disguised as craft practices or builders' marks. Equally mysterious are the geographic alignments, straight paths, called ley lines, connecting Templar sites across vast distances. Medieval people did not have satellites or GPS, yet many Templar sites align with uncanny precision. Researchers studying these patterns have discovered that Templar commanderies often sit atop ancient crossroads or energy points long revered by earlier cultures, from the Celts to the Romans to pre-Christian tribes. It seems the Templars deliberately built upon land charged with spiritual significance, just as they built upon the Temple Mount itself. This raises unsettling questions. Did the Templars understand something about these ancient sites that is now lost to us? Did they inherit knowledge from older traditions, blending Christian faith with deeper, older wisdom? And if so, were they attempting to mark a sacred map across Europe? The mystery expands further with the discovery of hidden chambers beneath former Templar fortresses. Excavations at various sites, Tomar, Geysers, Shinnon, and others, have revealed underground tunnels, sealed rooms, and stone vaults whose original purpose remains unclear. Some chambers contain inscriptions in Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. Others contain empty niches, as though items of immense importance were once stored there. A few archaeologists claim to have found tunnels pointing toward deeper chambers that remain sealed to this day, places that might still house scrolls, relics, or ritual objects that survived the purge. And while legends exaggerate, they often contain threads of truth. Many Templar strongholds were fortified not only above ground but beneath it. Labyrinths beneath castles, hidden escape routes, secretive alcoves carved with purpose. Yet perhaps the most haunting clues are not found in stone or tunnels, but in the documents the Templars left behind. While Philip tried to destroy their archives, many documents survived in places outside French jurisdiction. These include coded letters, strange diagrams, and references to the treasure that must never fall into the hands of the unworthy. Some describe relic transport routes. Others hint at ancient knowledge uncovered during excavations in Jerusalem. A few contain cryptic references to the shadow of the temple or the line of wisdom, phrases whose meanings have puzzled scholars for centuries. Among these manuscripts, one stands out: a mysterious parchment found at the Château de Geysers in the 20th century. It contained what appeared to be a diagram of underground chambers, dating to the Templar period. Though its origins remain debated, the find ignited a new wave of speculation. If the Templars hid artifacts or documents beneath sites like Geysers, what else remains sealed beneath European soil? Some clues go beyond parchment and stone. They reside in oral legends, stories passed quietly through families who once served the order. Villagers near former commanderies tell tales of knights who buried chests beneath oak trees or wells. Families claim their ancestors were entrusted with small secrets, key fragments, coded prayers, strange instructions. None of these stories can be proven, yet they persist across generations like echoes refusing to die. The deeper one follows these clues, the clearer a picture emerges. the Templars did not simply flee. They planted markers, left maps, preserved symbols, and encoded knowledge in the only mediums kings could not confiscate: architecture, geometry, ritual, myth. It is as though they intended the truth to survive not as a single artifact, but as a network of signs, scattered so widely and subtly that only a brotherhood with the right understanding could ever piece it together again. Europe today is filled with these quiet monuments, enigmatic traces of an order that officially ceased to exist in 1307. But stone does not forget. Symbols do not vanish. Rituals do not die. They merely change form. And so the mysterious traces of the Knights Templar remain all around us, silent, unresolved, waiting for those who know how to read the language they left behind. As the centuries unfolded, the sudden and brutal fall of the Knights Templar grew into more than a historical tragedy. It grew into a wound carved into the psyche of Europe, a wound that never healed, a wound that whispered, a wound that called out from the edges of memory, spawning theories, stories, conspiracies, and legends so vast and enduring that they transformed the order from a medieval brotherhood into an eternal mystery. With every generation, the questions became louder. How could an order so powerful fall so quickly? Why were the accusations so extreme, so theatrical, so unbelievable? What was Philip IV really afraid of? What did the Templars die protecting? And why did the Church, centuries later, quietly admit they were innocent? It is the contradictions that fuel the legend. And contradictions, in the absence of clarity, create myths. One of the earliest and most persistent theories claims that the Templars were targeted not out of greed or politics, but because they had uncovered truths that threatened the Church itself. If the order discovered ancient writings beneath the Temple Mount, writings that contradicted the Church's official teachings, then their destruction becomes not just strategic but necessary for those in power. Knowledge can be more dangerous than armies. A single scroll revealing alternate origins of Christianity would have shaken the medieval world to its core. Another legend claims the Templars were custodians of a bloodline, descendants of sacred lineage, perhaps tied to Davidic heritage or to early Christian families. This theory, sparked by medieval gossip and fanned by modern interpretations, suggests the order guarded genealogical secrets that could undermine the divine legitimacy of kings or popes. If the Templars possessed proof of a lineage that contradicted royal claims, the political consequences would have been catastrophic. But there is a darker possibility, one born not from sacred revelation but from sheer practicality. The Templars had become too powerful to coexist with medieval monarchs. Their banking system surpassed anything managed by kings. Their military discipline rivaled national armies. Their network of fortresses stretched across Europe. Their autonomy placed them beyond secular control. And worst of all, they had no allegiance to any kingdom. For medieval rulers, deeply paranoid, fiercely territorial, this was intolerable. Thus, some theories frame Philip IV not as a king-fearing heresy, but as a monarch terrified of competition. The Templars were the first multinational corporation, the first international military alliance, and the first independent intelligence network. Their existence foreshadowed modern states, and monarchs who existed in a world of feudal chaos could not tolerate such stability standing beside them. Then there are the stranger theories, whispers that border on the mystical. Some claim the Templars inherited the esoteric wisdom of ancient civilizations, Egyptian, Essene, or even pre-Judaic traditions. They point to the geometric precision of Templar architecture, the symbolic oddities woven into their chapels, and the strange rituals that inquisitors distorted into accusations of heresy. According to these theories, the order served as a bridge between ancient knowledge and medieval Christianity, guardians of a truth too vast for one religion alone. Others insist the Templars engaged in practices now associated with mysticism or alchemy. They suggest the order studied the nature of the soul, the transformation of spirit, or the structure of the universe through sacred geometry. These interpretations are fueled by similarities between Templar symbols and the symbols later adopted by Hermetic and esoteric circles. Was this a coincidence or inheritance? Some theories veer into the realm of secret brotherhoods. They claim the Templars survived their destruction by embedding themselves into new organizations, Masonic lodges, Rosicrucian orders, or clandestine societies that carried their teachings through the centuries. These theories suggest that although the order died publicly, it lived privately, its knowledge preserved through ritual, symbol, and lineage. Another enduring theory concerns the treasure of the Templars. The vanished fleet of La Rochelle remains the greatest magnet for speculation. Many believe the fleeing ships carried not gold, but documents, maps, scrolls, relics, genealogies, or perhaps something so symbolically powerful that it could never be disclosed. Some say the ships crossed the Atlantic and founded colonies long before Columbus. Others claim they sailed north to Scotland or the Baltic. The truth is unknown, but the absence of the treasure only magnifies its legend. And then there are the haunting questions about Jacques de Molay's curse. Did he truly prophesy the deaths of the Pope and the King? Was it divine justice or coincidence? Or did surviving Templars ensure the prophecy fulfilled itself through quiet vengeance? History offers no answer. Legends offer many. Every unanswered question becomes fuel. Every contradiction becomes a spark. Every gap becomes a doorway. And Europe, rich in imagination and haunted by memory, stepped willingly through that doorway. By the Renaissance, the Templars were no longer seen as heretics. They had transformed into tragic heroes. By the Enlightenment, they were symbols of lost wisdom. By the 19th century, they became mythic guardians of forbidden knowledge. By the 20th, they inspired books, secret societies, archaeological quests, and the imaginations of millions. And today, they still stand at the crossroads of history and mystery, half fact, half legend, entirely unforgettable. What keeps the theories alive is not proof, but possibility. The possibility that a powerful truth was buried with the order. The possibility that fragments of that truth survived. The possibility that the Templars were destroyed not because of what they did, but because of what they knew. And perhaps most unsettling of all, the possibility that somewhere, scattered across archives, hidden chambers, or private collections, remnants of the Templar truth still exist, waiting for someone to uncover the final link in a chain that began beneath the Temple of Solomon. Theories persist because the silence left behind is too vast, too deep, too deliberate to ignore. And in that silence, the world continues to search for answers, not because the Templars vanished, but because their absence left behind a vacuum that history, legend, and imagination have been trying to fill ever since. In the shadows of their downfall, as flames consumed Jacques de Molay on the Isle de la Cite and the temple's towers fell silent, Europe entered an era haunted not by the Templars' presence, but by their absence. It was as though the sudden destruction of an order so widespread, so disciplined, so deeply woven into the fabric of Christendom had torn a hole in history itself, one no king, no pope, no chronicler could truly mend. And through that hole drifted a final, uncomfortable truth. The Templars were gone, but nothing felt resolved. The years following their execution were not years of closure. They were years of confusion, guilt, and unanswered questions. Ordinary people murmured prayers for the souls of men they had once revered. Nobles whispered that France had damned itself with a crime too great to speak aloud. Clergymen, though silenced publicly, confessed privately that they feared the Church had bowed to a king rather than to God. A sense of unfinished business hung over Europe, heavy, suffocating, inescapable. The most unsettling irony was this. The Templars died without ever being proven guilty. Their confessions were obtained through torture. Their accusers gained wealth and power from their destruction. And the Church that condemned them quietly admitted, too late, that their trials had been unjust. In 1312, Clement V dissolved the order, but left its members' souls in limbo, neither vindicated nor condemned. In 1314, de Molay died proclaiming innocence. In 2007, 700 years later, the Vatican officially acknowledged that the Templars had been falsely accused. The record was corrected, but the wound remained, and Europe, haunted by its own betrayal, refused to let the story fade. In the centuries that followed, the Templars became more than martyrs. They became symbols, archetypes, a mirror through which every generation saw its own fears, its own hopes, its own unanswered questions. To Enlightenment thinkers, they were victims of tyranny, martyrs of royal corruption. To romantics, they were tragic heroes, noble warriors crushed by jealous kings. To mystics, they were guardians of secret wisdom, keepers of truths still waiting to be revealed. To modern seekers, they became puzzle pieces, clues in the great labyrinth of human history. The Templars' extinction was too dramatic, too sudden, too suspicious for history to accept as final. Something in the story felt incomplete, as though a final page had been torn out. And when a page is missing, imagination fills the void. Legends rose like mist. Some said the Templars would return when the world needed them most. Others claimed they never truly disappeared at all, that their bloodlines continued, hidden but unbroken. Some whispered that their treasure, whether physical gold or sacred knowledge, would one day be found. Others feared that revealing their secrets would shatter the foundations of faith and monarchy. But beneath all the myths, beneath the treasure hunts and conspiracy theories and secret society lore, one truth endures. The fall of the Templars was not just the collapse of an order. It was the collapse of an ideal of unity across borders, an ideal of discipline without tyranny, an ideal of faith sharpened by reason, an ideal of service without expectation of reward, an ideal of brotherhood bound not by blood, but by oath. When Philip IV destroyed the Templars, he did not merely eliminate a threat. He extinguished one of the few institutions in medieval Europe that rose above the greed and politics of the era. And in that loss, the world felt something profound slip away. Perhaps that is why the Templar story refuses to die. Because it represents not only what was destroyed, but what might have been. A world where knights served justice rather than kings. A world where knowledge was cherished rather than feared. A world where unity transcended borders and crowns. A world where faith and reason worked together, not in opposition. But the final legacy of the Templars lies not in what they were, but in what they left behind. A lingering question that echoes across the centuries, whispered in books, carved in stone, and carried in the quiet corners of our imagination. What if the secrets they carried were never meant to be lost? What if the knowledge they guarded was a message for the future? A truth buried, waiting for the right moment, the right eyes, the right minds to uncover it. And if such a revelation were found, if the world suddenly grasped the full weight of what the Templars discovered beneath the Temple Mount, or preserved in hidden archives, or encoded in the architecture of Europe, would we be ready? Would we understand it? Would we embrace it? Or would we fear it just as Philip did? The Templars' story ends in fire and betrayal. But their legacy, that is something different. It is an open door, a quiet challenge, a reminder that history is built not only on what we know, but on everything we have yet to uncover. And so, as the embers of Jacques de Molay's pyre fade into the night, as Europe moves on and centuries unwind, a final thought lingers, soft, stirring, and impossible to ignore. Some secrets do not die. They wait for light, wait for truth, wait for the moment when the world is ready to ask, and finally brave enough to listen. In the centuries following their destruction, the Knights Templar transformed from a fallen brotherhood into an expanding legend, one shaped not by their swords, but by the silence they left behind. Europe, unable to accept their sudden disappearance, began to reshape their memory. First came sorrow. Monks whispered that injustice had been done. Nobles admitted, in private, that France had crossed a moral line. Even the Church quietly acknowledged regret. But the wound of their fall did not close. Instead, it deepened into fascination. By the Renaissance, the Templars evolved from martyrs into guardians of lost wisdom. Scholars speculated about forbidden knowledge they uncovered beneath the Temple Mount. Artists painted them as tragic heroes. Philosophers used their downfall as evidence of tyranny's brutality. Then came the Enlightenment, and the Templars became symbols of rational virtue crushed by corrupt power. Revolutionaries invoked their name as a reminder that institutions built on truth could still be destroyed by fear. Their story grew into inspiration, warning, and myth all at once. The Romantic era added another layer, casting them as ghostly knights haunting abandoned chapels and ancient forests, protectors of hidden relics and sacred secrets. By the modern age, The Templars had become embedded in popular culture, appearing in novels, films, games, and theories that circle endlessly around their disappearance. Their legacy endured because it spoke to universal desires: loyalty, courage, justice, brotherhood, and the belief that truth can outlive its persecutors. Today, the Templars symbolize more than history. They embody a question that echoes across centuries. If truth were threatened, who would defend it with the courage the Templars showed? As the flames of Jacques de Molay's pyre faded, the story of the Knights Templar refused to end. Their destruction left behind a silence that felt unfinished, filled with questions no king or pope could erase. History recorded their fall, yet something deeper lingered: the sense that truth had been buried, not resolved. De Molay's final declaration of innocence became more than a protest. It became a symbol, a reminder that justice can be silenced, but not destroyed. Over time, the Templars transformed into more than warriors. They became an idea of courage, unity, and knowledge guarded against fear. Their legacy survives because it asks a question still unanswered. What truth were they trying to protect? Maybe it was ancient wisdom, maybe a hidden relic, maybe a lesson meant for the future. And so the Templar story becomes a quiet challenge. When truth is threatened, will we defend it as they did?